Welcome, Slayers of Giants, to Tilting at Windmills. After talking for weeks about the show's name change and the shift in our format, we're all ready to do that this week, and Chris, my co-host, has laryngitis and can't make a peep. So this first Tilting at Windmills is just me and our great guest, Dana Sharman, and Doug the producer. Of course, he's still here to join us on this quixotic quest to fight fascists with art. So we'll be back with two hosts next week, I'm sure, fingers crossed. And now I know that if I ever completely lose my voice, Chris will be able to take over for me and the show will go on. So thank you for joining us for this first episode of Tilting at Windmills. I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with guest Dana Sharman as much as I did. Welcome, everyone. This is the first official episode of Tilting at Windmills. We've told you that we were going to change the show's name, so it's still our 143rd episode, but now it is no longer Writers Not Writing. This is Tilting at Windmills, and we have the perfect guest for Tilting at Windmills. Dana Sharman is a photographer. He's also a writer, and his writing will be something we will talk about, but his day job is a photographer, an art photographer. And so that is... we want to broaden the show to include more artists. And so I'm very excited to have Dana here today. In addition to being a photographer, Dana is also, serves on the budget committee of the City of Independence, where I used to live, and is the writer of this document that I want to talk to you about first, called the Authoritarian Shift Readiness Guide. And we will host this document on, in the show notes. I'll link to it. We'll have it on our website. But this is something that I really want folks to open up, look through, and I think when you do, you'll realize how valuable this is. So, Dana, will you tell everybody about the Authoritarian Shift Readiness Guide and kind of what motivated you to write this?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I'm a bit of a radical centrist. I try to avoid getting drawn in either direction by the political extremes that take place nowadays, but there are certain things that take place in society that people of all stripes should be concerned about. And we've begun to see some of these traits popping up in our society. This isn't necessarily new, and our country isn't the first to have done these, which is why it makes it so easy to spot. Just in the last 25 years, we've had Russia, Turkey, Hungary, Venezuela, all turn into authoritarian regimes from democracies. Yeah. And the way that they did it, we're seeing some of those same patterns being copied here in the United States. So step one, when you begin seeing these problems popping up, I think it's really important to at least put it on your radar and be aware and start making plans to help yourself in the event. There's no guarantee that things will slide that far, but right. If you're going that way, if you're caught off guard, you're in trouble.
Right. And so the guide itself is kind of an action plan to note, oh, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, and then think through, what will I do when we get to this step and this step? And that's one of the things that I find so valuable about it. I think a lot of folks are, taking in all this information and it's overwhelming, and taking the time to think, what is my red line? Where am I going to say, nope, I need to now act in the following way, is incredibly valuable. And so how did you think through kind of that process?
Well, like I said, I was in the military, and one of the key things that the military teaches you is safety and planning. That's 99% of the game. The other 1% is the one we all talk about. But in order to properly prepare yourself for a situation, you have to know what you're doing. And, really the way it started, the most genuine, honest way I could say it is I take care of my mom. She has Alzheimer's. And I started thinking about myself as somebody who would much rather go out and fight fascism. But then I had to think, realistically, can I do that? Right. And the answer is no. Right now I can't. And so because I can't, my whole plan is out the window.
Right.
And so I'm in a situation where it's like, well, what do I do? And when specifically should I act? Mm-hmm. Because we have a tendency as humans to move goalposts. We do. We hear things that we find unacceptable. They become normalized. We all know this. And yet we don't seem to do much about it. So having a document like this where you can write down, hey, this is the red line. I will not continue to move past this point without making my actions that I've prepared It's just incredibly valuable, I found. That's
Yeah.
just why I wrote this for free. I didn't put my name on it. It's available to everybody. It's just something to help people out.
Yeah, that guide is, going through that thought process is so valuable for folks. I think a lot of folks are in your position, whether they've got an elderly parent, whether they've got children, the idea of I'll just wait and then I'll take to the streets should the need arise. Will you? When you've got, are you gonna arm your 4-year-old?
You're going to find out real quick that you're not. Most people
Yeah,
don't. And if we look at history, most people didn't,
right.
because
And so
by the
then,
time it's at that point, it's too dangerous to go out there and
right.
fight. I
And
mean,
then when it's too dangerous to go out and fight, you end up collaborating, right? You end up going,
right.
well, I'm going to keep my head down, and I guess
Yeah.
I'll just cooperate with the regime because I'm too afraid. And
I've
so,
still got my job, I've still
right?
got my house. It's okay, and you shrink those borders around yourself
Yes.
until you're just in a ball.
Yep. And I can imagine already, today there are comedians waking up saying, what jokes can I not tell? And then
Right.
I don't want to be Jimmy Kimmel. Where last week they were saying, I would love to be Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, I just had somebody share with me this morning what he said, and I'm like, that's not even that wasn't even a joke. Like it wasn't even anything bad.
yeah,
I can't believe that he was pulled off air for that. And
yeah.
the fact that the president called the FCC director and the FCC contacted ABC, it's like this wasn't just a decision by ABC independently to make this choice.
No.
They were threatened by the federal government, and they know that they could lose their license. I mean, especially considering what 2 days ago Trump was talking about pulling people's media license or their broadcast licenses. I mean, that's tier one stuff out of this document.
Exactly. Well, and it's a very good example of misapprehensions about the First Amendment. Like the First Amendment never prevented a private entity from saying, we're going to fire this employee or that employee. It
Mhm.
explicitly is to prevent the government from limiting speech. And this is textbook. Like the government, the president calls up the head of the FCC calls up a private enterprise and says, you will not have this person on anymore. We now have a First Amendment violation. Like that is very straightforward at that
But
point.
on the moderating side here, I do want to say that the president can't just necessarily pull their licenses arbitrarily.
Right.
So he can say whatever he wants to say, and this man does say a lot of crazy stuff. He puts out executive orders all the time that are totally illegal, don't end up even being applied in a lot of cases, and really it's just a signal to his base that he's doing something about it. But it does set the stage for the normalization so that later on he
Right.
could potentially do that.
Well,
So,
and also, I mean, this is one of the things we saw in Florida a lot. You don't actually have to do it. You just have to threaten to do it, right?
mhm,
So if, in Florida, they said, we're going to put this legislation in place that is kind of colloquially referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill. And it's, hey, if you are a teacher and you do the following, and it was all intentionally very amorphous, but you teach gender ideology, you'll be fired. And what ends up happening is rather than challenging it, teachers just went through their libraries and went every single book that has a gay character, just pull them, just to be safe. I don't
yeah,
want
people don't want the heat.
right. Well, that's government censoring. Like it is, very straightforward government censorship. And yet, people obeyed and as Timothy Schneider would say, don't obey in advance. Like instead of testing it and saying, wait, this book has no sex scene, it has a character with two gay dads. Can I still have that in my classroom? Let's test it. If everybody says the testing is not worth it, I don't want to lose my job, let's just fire Jimmy Kimmel. We don't want to lose our license, right? And so it becomes obeying in advance. And so then they can't even be checked by the courts. Like, ABC is not going to go to court to go to bat for Jimmy Kimmel. They just get rid of him. And now they
Right.
never know, right?
Well, and this is one of the things that I was going to discuss in that other book that I'm writing. But I don't believe that these things are accidental, and I don't believe that they are, what's the word, avoidable. I
Yeah.
don't. I think that you and I are never going to convince everybody to stand up and fight. You're
Right.
just not. It's just never happened. And it's unfortunate. But I think that until we begin to realize that, we're going to continue expecting that and waiting for that, and
Right.
it's going to be too late.
Well,
So,
even more cynically, I think that if, people have the attitude of somebody else will fight on my behalf. Like,
mhm,
no, nobody's going to fight for you. And
yeah,
that was part of the calculus I made was looking around at my dear friends and neighbor, but I mean, like loved ones and going, if I were grabbed and taken off to an ICE facility tomorrow, nobody's going to literally bust me out
See,
physically,
I
right?
saw you say that. I saw you say that, and all I was thinking in my head was like, "Hi,
Yeah,
I would, I
yeah,
would."
yeah,
And
yeah,
we are out here, but we're
right.
not making a lot of noise. We're not
Yeah,
making Facebook posts. Like I try to keep my political commentary on social media to an absolute minimum because I don't want evidence. Really,
right,
I don't
right.
want an authoritarian government knowing how I feel. But I promise you, we're out here.
Yeah, yeah.
And
There
if
are people, and actually, there was a case in Texas. I don't know if you saw about this, where some people did attack an ICE facility. So
oh
there,
really?
yeah, it didn't get a lot of press because they don't want to
Yeah,
say,
no, you're not going to hear about that.
right? But yeah, there were some folks who attacked an ICE facility, and so there's been a little bit of that, right? But it is
Hmm.
not in mass. Like, and
Right.
most people are saying to themselves, there would be a mass movement. Well, there may be. There was a resistance movement in France. There was a resistance movement in Germany, right, where people literally took up arms, but it was not the majority of the population. And so if you're
Right.
waiting for the majority of the population to save you, recognize you're part of that majority. And, or in my case, recognize, I've recognized I'm a very small part of the minority who's saying this is not right. I needed to get out because there's not
Yeah.
going to be enough folks to say, "Oh, we'll protect you in speaking out in that way." Is an army taking to the streets today for Jimmy Kimmel, right? He's a lot more famous than I am, and they
Right.
were not mass protests, right?
Well, there were some pretty big protests in front of ABC, but not. I mean, we're not talking like George Floyd protest
Right.
levels, but there were protests. Yeah, and I don't know. I there's a time and a place, and that's something as a soldier. Discipline is very important as a soldier. You The reason the American military is as strong as it is because of discipline, because we have the most disciplined fighting force. So that's something that I apply to my life. There is a time to fight back against authoritarianism, and there's a time to allow the democratic process to work. And I think that barring some major social event like mass unemployment or mass poverty coming, which may be in our future as it is,
Right.
uh, there there isn't going to be a large number of people resisting anything because there's just not reason to.
Right.
So yeah, Jimmy Kimmel is not the hill to die on, I guess is a simple way of
Right. No,
putting
and
it.
I agree, but I think one of the things that'll be interesting to see is if the president decides, hey, this next congressional election is not going to go my way, and it's going to be a giant pain in my ass to not have a Congress that's on my side, and tries to say, there's an emergency. We have to postpone the election. Is that the kind of circumstance where people will say, it's not the end of my life if my congressional representative doesn't get picked by me? I'll let this slide. Well, if we lose,
Mostly.
have elections, which I could totally imagine. I can imagine people
Mhm.
saying, this is, I'll go out in the streets and have a peaceful protest and say I'm mad about this, but not, I will
Oh
shut
yeah.
the economy.
Yeah, you
Well,
don't even have to imagine. Just look at the other countries where it happened. I
yep,
mean, in the last 25 years, there were plenty of protests in Russia when he, took a third term and all
yep.
that stuff. It's like, yeah, but people don't actually do anything.
Yeah, and
And
I've
so,
been trying to tell folks, there are different ways to fight back. The virtue, the idea of nonviolence is, I respect where it comes from, and also I recognize that it is often used by authoritarians to say be nonviolent, and we were, inured to that. Like, we were just, taught that from birth. You're
mhm,
only virtuous if you're being nonviolent. Well, the state can be a violent actor, but you're not allowed to, right? And so one of the things
right.
I've been trying to encourage people to consider are what are those things that are in between, right? You don't have to harm anyone to shut down a port. And they're
Yeah.
really smart about this, like in Oakland, where they'll just the union, the dock workers, they can cause massive economic calamity by just saying we will not go to work. And
Yeah.
that is so important. And so there are other things that Americans could be considering. If there's no elections, close all the airports. People will be hugely inconvenienced, right? That would
See,
be
that
really,
type of behavior, it definitely falls under civil disobedience.
right.
And civil disobedience is a whole different ballgame than violence.
Yeah.
So I have to say clearly, I'm not supportive of any violence towards the regime in any sense. But no, historically, if we look to Germany and if we look to Poland and we look to Hungary, some of the most effective resistance is from teachers, from local politicians, city councilors, trade unionists,
Yeah.
anybody who controls the economic machine. I mean, if you can shut down a highway, if you can make sure every car comes out with a defect, if you can make sure that the bills of lading for shipping materials get lost, if you can, little things like that are much more effective because you're not going to fight the US military
Right.
to beat it. You're just not. You can't shoot a Predator drone. You can't even see an Apache shooting you with a missile from 26 miles away. You're just not.
Right.
So you have to make it crumble from within. And that's one of the problems that we're facing today too, especially with social media, is the fact that we have multiple other countries seeking to make us crumble from within. Not and it's not a fantasy system because we did it to the USSR in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So again, history has shown us these are all real things based on real history.
And we have lots of experience doing it. We did it to Argentina. We did it to, I mean, you can do this
Oh
to
yeah, CIA is masterful at this.
very good at this. Well, one of the things that will be interesting to watch is the actual morale in the army. The military often is the tipping point, right? When the military turns on the government and says this is too far. And I wonder a lot about our own military. Like you said, discipline is so important that you're not going to have a bunch of privates say, I am frustrated with this. Okay, then you go to the brig. Like that's not,
Yeah.
it's
No, I've told people that, people were calling people in DC, they were screaming at soldiers on the street, saying like, you're a fascist, you're supporting this. I'm like, dude, I would have been there. All right. I wrote this document and I still am telling you firsthand, I would have stood on the street there because that was not the hill to die on. Because in wartime circumstances, if you disobey an order, they can just shoot you. You're just dead. Okay. So you have to ask yourself, is this the moment that I am willing to die to resist what's going on? And standing on a street corner in DC is not it.
Right.
It's just not going to be it. So don't take that as a sign that they're happy with it or that they're okay with it.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people are. Give them some slack. Like let them come over to your side. You want them to be friendly with you.
Right. Well, and I wonder, will that, I mean, we've seen this happen in the police forces in the, post George Floyd, where the recruitment is just decimated because who wants to become a cop and be, shouted at? And so
Yeah.
I think some of that is strategic where they're just saying, would anybody want to choose to be a soldier right now and be marching through LA and have everybody who is your family, your friends, your loved ones screaming at you? Why join
Well,
up?
this is the scary part is the people who join in situations like that are the ones who want it. The cops who join right now, they're the ones who are okay with that and they're ready for it. They joined because of that in that environment. So yeah, it's something to watch out. But it also means that 5-10 years after events like that, you're going to see a massive uptick in police violence. You're going to see increases in racism. I mean, civil rights violations. You're going to see all of that as a result. And this is the interesting part about society too, is the fact that the George Floyd protests, a presumably good thing, creates a monster afterwards.
Right.
But then that monster creates an equal reaction. This is all of history. It's just been doing this for like 10,000 years.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that, because you've been working on another project that is a larger project about dealing with those kinds of root causes. So tell everybody about that.
Yeah. So the kind of idea is that when we look back through history, you can look back to 10,000 BC and forward, and you can see consistent behavioral patterns in humanity that are woven throughout all of society, from military to government to social interactions. And I think a great example of that was there was a document, I don't remember exactly where it was. I think it was either China or in the Mediterranean or the Middle East. You may have heard of it yourself. But it was just a letter that a kid wrote home to his mom in like 300 BC, complaining that his clothes weren't as cool as the clothes of everybody else in school, and he hates his mom. And I was like, to hear that from somebody 2,600 years ago or 2,300 years ago, it's like, dude, we are exactly the same creature. We haven't changed.
Oh yeah.
Um, and whether you believe in God or you believe in science and evolution, that stands true. Like,
Yeah.
if you believe in God, we're the same humans. If you believe in evolution, we haven't changed in 52,000 years, roughly.
Well,
So I think
which
we
fits
forget
with,
that.
as somebody who believes strongly in evolution, I
Mhm.
consider myself an agnostic. There may be deities, I don't know, but
Yeah.
when it comes to evolution, our sense of shouldn't we have changed is wildly out of sync with the time frame of evolution. Like we would not have
Yes.
changed that much in,
Yeah.
it takes
Very minorly, if at all.
times, right? And so, I mean, far more from our own breeding than
Mhm.
from, actually evolving, in some kind of natural way, especially since we have made ourselves very comfortable in our environment so that such that it doesn't kill us off when we have a trait that is, we can continue, we can persist and we can continue to have children, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, we're not, if anything, we're evolving more slowly than species in the wild. And so we, you're right, absolutely right. People are people and have been for the last 10,000 years. And I think that in China, they have a really interesting attitude about this because the empire has been more stable.
Mhm.
It's become part of the culture to just accept that China will always kind of be there. And U.S. absolutely, we fall into that myth, but we don't have 5,000 years of history. We have,
Right.
240. So they feel like a child who is the child of two wealthy parents is the most endangered of being spoiled, and if you really struggle as a family, that's actually better for your kid. And as parents, you should really worry if your kids got it too easy, right? And I think we see this kind of on a larger scale too. The countries that get very comfortable are the ones where this minor inconvenience becomes a political possible wedge, right? You can
Mhm.
make somebody feel so threatened by something that to somebody in Rwanda right now, they're like, wait, I may have to wear a mask. I'm not going to protest having to wear a mask, right? I'm going to keep my neighbors safe because I've got bigger things to worry. Rwanda's a bad example. They've actually done really well since they're one of the wealthier countries. They're doing really well. But if you were in Bhutan, for example, incredibly poor country, very happy country, right? But Guatemala, my dad was down there and was like, these are the happiest people you will ever meet, and it is one of the
Yeah.
countries in the world, right? Whereas here we can be so outraged by things that are so small.
Well, and I think that really speaks to social media
Mhm.
specifically because I mean, I don't know how to say it to get it across to people because we've all heard it and we've all heard it so many times. But the Surgeon General declared it as hazardous smoking or drinking while pregnant. Teen female suicide rates are up 800% in the last 20 years. There's the school shootings are up massively in the
Yeah.
same time period. Uh, all of these things are correlated with, and God, I hate saying it because it always sounds so crazy. 25, 30 years ago, this would have been crazy, but now it's documented. Edward Snowden's released information, Chelsea Manning, many other people have leaked information that support what I'm saying here. And that is that the internet is a battlefield. It is, and not in a metaphorical sense, not in a fictitious sense, but a literal battlefield in which governments test manipulation techniques against civilians. And Americans are specifically susceptible to this because we have an open internet, whereas in China they limit what they can see and they have censors and stuff like that. But in America, man, they are loving it. They are loving the fact that they can influence Americans, and that's why TikTok was going to be banned because China had control over the manipulation. US doesn't like that. We like to keep our people in our little bubble and keep them just mad enough that they're dumping their rage into a void on the internet, but not mad enough that they actually go outside and do anything about it.
Yeah.
And you'll see these waves like the Charlie Kirk wave. Everybody got super upset and outraged online, but then things started toning down and the post became more calm. The things you started seeing were more rational and reasonable. And that's all intentional. It's not accidental. Smarter people than you and I are out there doing this on purpose to us because yeah, it's so I really recommend people take a step back from social media in general. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
sorry.
yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And one of the ways to kind of know this is the algorithm itself is proprietary. You and I cannot know what the algorithm, why the choices the algorithm is making, right?
Hmm.
And so if you set yourself up, and kind of the most dangerous forums are the ones where people are very passive, rather than I searched out this article on this newspaper that I trust. It's, the folks who used to have to manipulate people through the mainstream media are having a
Hmm.
field day because they can skip that, right? You don't have to
Right.
get the Washington Post to publish an article about it. Washington Post is busy getting hammered by this administration and firing people that speak out against it,
Hmm.
because they can go more directly, and Trump knew this very well. Build your own social media network. You can get people directly, and then the algorithm is feeding you. And I saw this with students all the time. The students who were the most susceptible to kind of conspiratorial thinking and a lot of misinformation were the ones who would watch YouTube videos and then not choose the next one. They would let the algorithm choose.
Oh, really? Okay.
So dangerous, because the algorithm then chooses something. It says, oh, you're into the moon. Here's some science about the moon. And then the next one is, here's some science and something that says, and maybe it's full of aliens. And then the next one that says, it's full of aliens and they're secretly all your enemies. And then the next one says, like they always go to, but,
Yep.
the anti-Semitism is at the base. you know, you,
Well, and true, and nowadays they have a multi-pronged approach because generally, if we hear something that we know is untrue, but then we hear it in multiple places,
yes.
our brains subconsciously accept it as true, even if we don't consciously accept it as true. So we may go about the rest of our lives thinking that we don't agree with that, but we will be slightly primed towards that type of thinking and finding it true.
I found this
So,
fascinating. Yeah, this is completely true, and I found this fascinating. This is the brilliance of Fox News. So the way Fox News works is, behind the scenes is the Ailes puts out like a talking point that must be hit every hour. And so if you or I were to turn on Fox News, we'd go, well, that was a lie. That was fine. Okay, whatever. It's not really that particularly that salient a story. Oh, here's a story about, a person of color committing a crime. But that story is in isolation. I can treat that as isolated, right? But if
mhm,
you are one of these folks who's retired and you watch it all day long, you start to go, it feels to me like everybody is saying this. Well, the everybody
mhm,
is all the hosts, right? But they saw
yep,
it for 6 hours, and it's so much more manipulative if it is hitting you over and over to go, everybody's saying, everybody was seven people, but
right.
we're not
Yeah,
seven
and then you tie
people.
in social media. You're like, okay, well, I heard it on Fox. I didn't really buy it, but then I saw it on Twitter, and
Right,
now I'm not so sure. And then my friend talked about it, and now I'm pretty sure it's true.
right,
And you can set that up really easily
right.
as a government, as a media organization, as somebody with money and power. You can set that up. So
Yeah.
yeah, and really, you don't have to trust that what we're saying is true here. Just look for yourself. Just look
Mhm.
at the outcomes that are coming. Look at how people are behaving based on what they're seeing. Trust yourself. I mean, don't trust two people on a
Right,
podcast. Like,
right.
trust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and even it's funny, they often weaponize the things that would inoculate you. So you'll hear
Hmm.
people who are manipulating you the most often say, "Do your own research."
Hmm. That's true. Yeah.
Even
Well,
that's
yeah, because it makes you think that you don't have to do your own research. You're
exactly.
like, oh, he's being open and honest. It's like, no, seriously, go do your own
Yeah, when
research.
they say do your own research, do not just trust them. Go
Yeah.
and do it, because
Hmm.
I remember once I was at a protest. Michael Flynn, who has become, I mean, that guy's,
I'm
but
not familiar with them. Who is he?
he's a former army general, and
Okay.
even people that I knew who were in the army were like, he's always been nuts, like he's way fringe, right? He started
Gotcha.
going around doing this tour that was really weird, because it was like almost a religious thing. It was almost like tent revival, but with this
Hmm.
far right, pro-Trump bent. And so we were protesting at one of those, because they had hired Proud Boys to be their security. And
Right.
we were,
I remember that.
yeah, and so we were like, hey, you know, you think you're going to a religious service, but you need to know, if the people are hiring a racist group, this is not something you want to be involved in. And these folks would go, we don't believe you, we don't trust you, you must be getting your news from MSNBC. And it was really eye-opening to me, where I was like, these folks only believe that because they get their news from Fox, everyone else must be getting their news from MSNBC. And I was like, I don't,
That's always crazy to me when people say that too. They're like, you must watch MSNBC or
right. And I'm
CNN
like,
or
no,
ABC. I'm like,
I read. And they were like,
yeah,
and they
I
were
haven't had cable in 16 years, man. I don't watch any of that.
they found it just totally unbelievable. They were like, "No way! I don't believe you. You must be watching MSNBC." And I was like, "No, I'm reading The Guardian. Like I'm reading
Right.
foreign newspapers because I want a perspective that is outside of the United States. Because, like we said, it is everything is very easy to manipulate from inside, right? And so,
Yeah, I'm
telling
a big
people,
fan of WEON, the Indian news network.
yeah,
They
yep,
they're kind of anti-America, so there's a little bit of like anti-American propaganda mixed in there. But I kind of like that because one, it's easy to spot, and two, it gives you a less biased perspective, like for sure, because they don't really love America so much.
they don't love America, although I've noticed they do love they either love or feel very cowed by Modi. And so you're watching it
Yes,
and they're going, America's terrible. And then they'll be like, our president, who's the greatest ever. And you're like, okay. They
right.
were if you've got the kind of media savvy to go, I would never trust anything they say about Modi. They are afraid of Modi. But they might have some insights into the United States that I'm not going to be exposed to here. It's valuable.
Right. And they also might have motivations to convince Americans of
Right.
insights about America too. So you need to keep that in mind,
Right.
like
Yes.
they might be telling me this because they want me to be a little less trusting of my government.
Yeah.
So, and America is great, man. Like I said, I signed up to serve this country. I truly believe that America in its truest form is the pinnacle of human creation so far. I think it's greater than splitting the atom. I think that what we've managed to do socially is incredible. And I know, I mean, looking back to Polybius, I'm a big fan of Polybius. He wrote a 42 volume. So are you familiar with Polybius? Or
Uh,
maybe I can explain to the audience just for the heck of it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he was a Greek who was born and lived in Megalopolis, I think it was, in Greece during the time of the Roman invasion. And people in Greece at that time believed that they were culturally superior, they were scientifically superior, and they were untouchable by this barbaric Roman Empire off in the distance. So that type of hubris led to them being captured. They didn't expect Rome to march in with an army because they wouldn't march in with an army. And when the cities fell, he was taken as a slave back to Rome. When he was brought back to Rome, slavery was a lot different there. I don't care to get into
Right.
slavery, but he was given his own place. He worked for like a high class nobleman because he could write. And during this time, he wrote a 42 volume series of books that discussed the cycles of human life and governmental cycles. He called it anacyclosis. Anacyclosis. And it's essentially the same meme that we hear about today, like strong men create weak times or whatever that thing is, but it's a more refined philosophical discussion of how that works. And if we look back at human history, we can see the same cycle take place in almost every culture throughout time. And I say almost every culture because with, small tribes and stuff, you obviously don't get monarchies rising and dictatorship. You don't get all that.
Right.
But it's a cycle between monarchy to dictatorship to oligarchy to democracy to anarchy back to monarchy. And that's not precise because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's cyclical. And when we recognize that there is this cycle that takes place, which many of us know, I mean, I don't think that's really news to many people that there's some sort of cycle that takes place. We can see it today. We went from World War II and we had a period of greatness, and then we had a period of sort of disgust with the system, and then we saw a slow descent into chaos as tyrants rose, and it's not news. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, I'm getting off track. I forgot where I was going
No,
with that.
that's that's I absolutely can we can see those patterns. And one of the challenges with the patterns is that they are not predictable in terms of their pacing, right? And so, certainly we can see how a rise to being kind of a great power can lead to decadence and decay, right?
Right.
Are you going to be in power for 100 years, 1,000
Yeah.
years, or are you going to fall apart in 30?
Well,
And
yeah, that's one interesting thing too, is nowadays with modern technology, with the internet, with things like that, things are going faster. So, while Rome took 150 years to fall, I mean, some might say 400, some might say 250. I say 150 because I think that was really the period of hard decline. It was definitely decaying before that. But Yeah. In modern times, you're going to see those same cycles take place in decades to a decade, as
Yeah.
opposed to 150 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and, I think it's very hard for Americans. We were raised with such, everybody says the Pledge of Allegiance. It is, completely socially unacceptable to say, hey, we're not the best at this. Like,
Mhm.
that's like wild for Americans to hear. Like, when you even say, like, our healthcare system is not good, they're like, but it's
Mhm.
ours. It must be good. Like, no, it's actually really crappy. Um,
Exceptionalism. It's a
yeah,
common trait
that's
along with
it's
nationalism.
one of those consequences of that mentality that we've been
Mhm.
so brainwashed into believing is that we're particularly fragile when it comes to, somebody says, "Hey, your empire can fall," and we're like,
Mhm.
America's got to last forever." And it's like, well,
Right.
you don't understand. We've only been around for 250 years. We've only let the majority of people vote for the last 100 and, well, not even since Civil War, because women couldn't vote till when 19, what is it, 09. And so true democracy, where you've got most of the people, most of the adults able to actually vote, is only 100 years old. you
Well,
know
I think it's important to note too, because you mentioned China earlier. A lot of people, I think, get this wrong, and they say China's been around for 5,000 years. It's
right,
like, well, the Chinese people have,
right.
but their government has undergone multiple splits
Oh my
and
gosh, you're right. I mean, the
reunifications.
modern, communist enterprise is much younger than the United
Right.
States.
And people point to Britain and they're like, well, Britain's been a monarchy forever. It's like, yeah, but their modern form of parliamentary monarchy
Yeah,
is totally different than what it was 100 years ago. So when you begin to pick those things apart, you realize that no civilization really lasts that long.
right.
And we're not going to be any different. And that's what my next book is about like, hey, so what can we do knowing that this is always going to decay, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
So,
well, and you're right, and even I wouldn't even go so far as decay. It will change. Like we don't
mhm.
know what's coming next. It will be a different system, but it is going to be a rough transition, right? Like,
Right.
you
And
know,
and really I think the best we can do, the best we can hope for is to set it up in a way that it doesn't become the worst kind of system.
yes,
Because when we look to places like China with, I mean, gosh, the crackdown, the Hong Kong protests, the way that they dismantled the resistance there is really telling for what we could face here in America.
yeah,
And that's why I'm very pro Second Amendment. So many people on the left are anti-guns, and I'm like, this is why we have those. I know it's a weird thing to bring up, but yesterday I was driving behind somebody and they had two bumper stickers. One said we need to ban all assault rifles and high capacity magazines, and one that said something about bans on abortions and how that's wrong. And I'm like, if you had your guns, they wouldn't take your right to do that. You know what I
well, but I
mean?
do wonder about
So,
this because you were mentioning earlier, and I think we I will meet Second Amendment. I was a gun owner. Like I'm not opposed to the Second Amendment by any means, but I would meet other folks in forums where you're buying and selling guns, like you're talking about guns, and they
mhm.
would be like, "Well, we need to have these guns to fight off the United States government should it ever become tyrannical." And I'm
Yeah.
like, you are not going to beat the US military with your 9mm pistol. Like, that is not the way, like you said,
Well,
attack the
I
helicopters.
said that for a lot of years, but look at the Taliban. Look at Al Qaeda. I mean, they managed to hold the US government off with all the might and resources that they could possibly throw at it. No laws, no rules. They went full on. And by that really, really shocked me. When they reinvaded in 2021, they had 100,000 fighters. And I'm like, how many did they have at the start of the war? At the start of the war in 2001, they had 68,000 fighters. So over the course of 20 years, they managed to not decrease, but increase their numbers by almost 50%. And
Wow.
I'm like, or almost 100% technically in that case, like 80%. I'm like, that tells you that you can fight off a tyrannical government with just AKs and pistols. It's
Yeah.
not going to be pretty, and you're not going to beat them, but you can bleed them out to the point, and that's the real purpose. Because, like I said earlier, you're not going to fight an Apache,
Right.
but you can throw your body in front of it enough times that they run out of missiles,
Right.
and
Right.
until they just go like, we can't do this anymore. Britain's going to stop trading with us, and we're going to lose our money, and we don't want to lose our money, so we'll stop killing our people. You can resist through that.
Yeah. Well, and that's, and I totally understand why folks on the left are arming themselves. Like,
Yeah.
like it's not a bad idea to, to make sure that you're thinking about that. At the same time, you're not going to do a full scale,
No, no, God, no. I
right?
mean, doing close quarters combat training and like clearing rooms and stuff like that. It's like, dude, get out of here. Like,
Yeah,
as a soldier, I'm telling you, you lose.
you
Okay,
will
you're
lose.
not
Yes,
beating me.
you're not going to beat the U.S. military.
And not because I'm like exceptional, but just because I'm trained and you're not. You know,
Right,
it's same as getting a
exactly.
boxing ring with somebody who can box or
Well, and
talking to cops.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's the preparation and the uniformity, right? Like you can say, okay, I've got my rifle and I've got my pistol and I've got my body armor, but the fact that the U.S. military, the guy next to him knows what he's gonna do because they know how to work together. You don't have that friend, right?
Right.
It's the coordination.
And
And
even if you do have the friends, you don't have the $10,000 thermal night vision goggles. You
right,
don't have the satellites watching. You don't have the helicopters and drones in the sky. Yeah, like your goal as a resist. You know what? I can't even say that. I'm not even going to say that. But either way, the point of this document was more focused on escape. Like how to keep yourself safe. If you can't leave the country, focus on where you can go that would be safe, making plans for things like that. Yeah, and it's
well,
something
when you
that
talk
I
about
kind of
those
want to do.
steps of those plans, this is another thing that I love about the document. Again, folks, we're posting it. I want you to check this out, but it's not here. If you cross this red line, leave. Like there's a lot of steps involved in terms of how you can prepare, what you can be thinking about. So, how did you think through that whole process?
Well, I took some of my military training and what I know from there. I took historical examples of successful and mostly unsuccessful resistance movements because most resistance movements have been unsuccessful for the most part. I hate to say it, but I took that into account, and I also took into account some of the maneuvers that are really common in various authoritarian takeovers from, of course, Nazi Germany to more recent ones like Russia and Hungary, because I do feel that Trump's model is more, it seems to be a hybrid. He's pulling a little bit from Russia's strategy. He's pulling mostly from Hungary,
It's very
but
Orban. Yeah, it's really Hungary.
yeah, it
The
is.
far right, I mean, JD Vance, these people were actually going and communicating with Orban. Like they,
Yeah. I believe it. Yeah. I mean, it really sounds like they took a page. And Trump doesn't scare me as much as the people around him.
yes,
Just to be clear, because
totally
Trump to
agree.
me, he's a grifter. He wants money, he wants power, he wants fame, he wants people to like him, he wants to be the center of attention. But his motivations are not nefarious in a dangerous to democracy sense. The people around him that are advising him do have scary ideas,
Yeah.
and because of that influence,
Well, or they have scary, consistent ideas. He has very scary ideas, but they're just convenience, right? He'll
right.
say whatever scary thing, but it's really just, about getting attention. They then
Right. Yeah.
say, oh, no, we're going to make that happen. Yeah, I totally agree. They are much scarier. Stephen Miller's, they are terrifying. And JD Vance very much is in this mold where he's, Peter Thiel. I mean, these people are smart and working together in a way that is not, Trump is useful for them.
Exactly. Yeah. And he's the useful idiot is how I like to think of it. Yes, he's dangerous on his own at any time. If he feels like he's being manipulated, he'll turn against these people. But it's just too good. Like people are too good for him to see through it. He's getting too old. He's just kind of a puppet at this point. And in a scary way, I'm glad he's there, because if something were to happen to him, we would have the JD Vance, or we'd have the Marco Rubio, or we'd have,
What I've been
somebody like
telling
that.
my family will be like, oh, and I see lots of this on threads, did he die today? And I'm like, don't be so sure that will be better. You know,
Yeah, that honestly could be a lot worse.
well, it's falling into there was this historical kind of theory that came about in the 1840s, I believe, which was in and of itself very racist and sexist. It's called the Great Man of History, and this is this idea that we can understand history just by studying famous people, white men almost exclusively, because their decisions were making all of the moving history in the direction that it moved, and that was a dear friend of mine who's a historian was, constantly pointing out to me how false this is. The great men of history were the product of social factors, right? And if you take out this leader, somebody else would have served the same function. And so,
That's true.
this idea of, oh, if we just would have killed baby Hitler, maybe you would have gotten somebody worse, because the problem was that there was this social movement in this direction. And somebody
Right.
like Trump is just filling a role that
Yeah.
unfortunately too many people in America want filled, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and we got to really look at why. I think that's why I consider myself more of a radical centrist. Because when I see people screaming, like it's good Charlie Kirk's dead. I'm happy, I'm celebrating. That type of stuff. That's not a one-off. Like it's all the time for basically anything that bad ever happens. If I was on the right, I would want a war too, and I would not. I would be like, these people hate me. They hate me. And he's telling me they hate me, and I'm seeing that they hate me. And whether that's true or not, I mean, again, that's why we all need to stay off social media, because you wouldn't be seeing this and you wouldn't be hearing that. But I truly understand where they're coming from. They feel like their identity is under attack.
Right.
And anytime you have that, I'm sure people, especially LGBTQ people, are in exactly that same boat where they feel like their identity is under attack. And it is under attack, but theirs is too.
That's the danger is, we need to deal with both people's emotional reality and the kind of facts on the ground, recognizing those are not always the same, right? And so if somebody is, white, male, and Christian, and they've got all the levers of power supporting them, they can still feel like they're under attack, right? They can feel like we are the most disadvantaged. Elon Musk may feel like he is embattled, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I used to describe it like this because I remember pretty much everybody's seen a show like this, or like the Sweet 16 shows back in the day. I don't know if they're still on, but I remember seeing like teen girls like screaming and cussing at their parents because they wanted a pink Lambo and they got a white one.
Right.
And it used to seem so ridiculous to me, but I'm like, but to them, it's as real as you not eating today.
Right.
Like in their world with their knowledge, like it's serious, and it may seem silly to you, but it's serious to them. And so we need to respect that, like that girl may truly be at risk of self-harm or something like that, even though it seems ridiculous.
Right.
We shouldn't just scoff it off. And I don't know. I think that with the psychological operations that are taking place on social media to make us hate each other and to divide us, it's almost impossible for us to ever come back together without stepping back from that. But I think that if we did, we would all, like, if you walked the street today, you wouldn't know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. You'd talk to just about anybody, and as long as you didn't bring up politics, and you're old enough to know that that's how it used to be. I mean, I remember it too. Like younger people.
Democrats and Republicans sitting around at the same tables. It was a very different ball game, right? And
Totally.
and one of the things that was interesting in the election of Joe Biden was a lot of folks on the right could not believe that he won the popular vote because they were evaluating it based on flags. And they were going, but the Democrats can't possibly have more people because I'm not seeing more Biden flags. And you'd hear this, you'd hear them say this. If you, if from within your bubble, you're saying the way that I show support is with a Trump flag, you presume, oh, the other side must do this as well. I'm not seeing Biden flags. Therefore, they went into that election saying, it's going to be a blowout. Everybody I know has a Biden flag. When they lost, they were going, he couldn't possibly have won, and it created this opening for it must have been a steal. It must have been a steal, right? Because of flags. And I think part of the rationale for that is, push people, and this is that manipulation you're talking about, push people to identify themselves so that you can create those divisions, right? So that you can sit down with somebody and say, oh, but you're a Knicks fan and I'm a Knicks fan. Like, no, because you're wearing a Trump hat. I'm not going to talk to you about the Knicks, right? And so make people label themselves in this outward way. And it is very, that kind of polarization breaks empires.
Yeah, we have some pretty extreme people here in the area, and you may be familiar with who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to name names. Former city councilor over in Dallas who has some very
about.
He recently, I keep tabs on him, let's say, and his followers to see the general pulse of that side of the society. They really are going off the deep end over this Charlie Kirk thing. And I went out of my way. I normally don't comment on anything over there anymore just because of the amount of extremism. But I went out of my way to talk to one of them and go like, "Hey, man, you know, I like hunting. Do you like hunting? You
Yeah.
know, do you like fishing? Because I like fishing. I'm a Democrat, but hey, how about shooting? Do you like shooting? I like going shooting. I love guns, man. You want to talk about guns?" And just no matter what I said, he was just on about how like I'm the devil and I'm evil. I'm a Marxist. I'm a Islo-communist or Islamunist, I think he said.
Wow.
But I think after I don't know 10 or 15 messages back and forth, he was at least dialed down to the point where he was talking. He definitely hadn't changed his tone and hadn't changed his topic, but he was to the point where he was actually talking with me, and I was like, okay, this is good. Like I'll take this as a win, man. We had a somewhat reasonable conversation about the problems in society rather than just screaming we need to kill these evil Democrats.
Yeah. Well, and
And
that dehumanization is part and parcel of fascism, right? You
yeah,
the people on the other side are not people anymore. And if you
hmm
get them to say, oh, you're a communist, regardless of what you say, I've decided you're a communist. And communists are a direct threat to me, to my religion, to my,
hmm
and so then it's very easy to go, I must interact with this person in this way because they are a danger to me,
yeah,
right? And so yeah, I found I got to the point where I was like, I used to get involved in these really long discussions trying to kind of say, hey, what can we find that we have in common? And I just
hmm
reached this point where I was like, I love that people do that, and also like know your role. Like that is not,
yeah,
I am not gonna ever be the, because as soon as I show up, they're like, wait a second, you're married to a bi woman and you're like, standing on
right,
the corner with the Black Lives Matter sign. You are never going to be able to speak to me. And I was like, okay, I'm preaching to the choir now. Like, and that's
yeah.
unfortunate because I know that it also accelerates, that kind of divide to have people who just are preaching to the choir, but also, I
Well,
know
yeah, I
that's
think back to Maoist China. You know, there were plenty of intellectuals who tried to push back against the communist takeover. And in the end, they were all beaten or hung on stage or shot in front of their families or killed by family members or made examples of.
Yep.
And that's something that's really concerning to me because it tells us that historically, it doesn't matter arguing with these people. It's more about reshaping their worldview. And you're not going to do that by talking to them. And especially on social media where you can only have a 1 or 2 or 3 sentence conversation, it's never going to happen. And nobody's going to read a 9 paragraph message. Trust me, I know. I read them all the
Or a book.
time.
Trust me, I've written
Yeah,
books that no one reads.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the persuasion is going to be done in on those kind of intimate low levels. This person
hmm
talking to a family member where they already have a way in, and they can, literally you're at the range and you can have that conversation, right?
Right.
You're fishing with somebody, you can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ways that we persuade are outdated. Like you can't go, I posted an op-ed. They're not reading the same newspapers as one another anymore, right?
hmm
And so, yeah, adjusting to the kind of realities of new media is
Well, and that's where I think we're falling into a trap on this because I don't think that there is a way. Because again, we're talking about psychological manipulation taking place by on the governmental level, on the platform level. You're even if you did it exactly how you're supposed to, it's never going to be presented to people in a way that they don't want.
right.
And I hate to say they, specifically Facebook. And I'm saying that based on facts, like it's several people have come out from Facebook saying, hey, they're manipulating the algorithm to show you
Oh
hateful
yeah.
stuff. They found, they did an internal study and found that it affected the election in 2016, that they actually had a measurable impact on it by the information people are shown. And this is all known. So I'm not just making conspiracy theories up. Because I always feel like conspiracy theorists.
Oh
I said
yeah.
this earlier in the
No,
show,
it's
but
so
like it's
dangerous where we're
true.
like, the line between what is a conspiracy theory and what can be demonstrated. I have to remind people like conspiracy, when you say it's a conspiracy, you're not saying it's false. Like, Julius Caesar was killed by a conspiracy of senators.
Yeah,
Conspiracies exist, right? And,
right,
they're the conspiracies that are absurd. The world is flat.
right.
And then there are
Lizard people.
yeah, and then there are ones where you can go, this is demonstrable. And
hmm
there are one of the ones that always comes to mind for me is there was a very interesting collaboration in the open. This wasn't even secret. This wasn't, oh, there's a secret cabal of lizard people. There was an open collaboration between religious schools and then the Republican Party, which was doing it for a different reason, and then the textbook manufacturers to support No Child Left Behind. And it was they had different motives. So the religious schools were like, this would be really great if you had to send a report card home every twice a year saying the public schools suck. That is going to drive folks to us, and we'll get vouchers and we'll get a lot of money, right? And then
Yep.
the Republican Party wasn't saying we want everybody to go to parochial schools. They don't care. What they were saying is we want people to homeschool because homeschoolers, even if you can increase the percentage of homeschoolers from, 2% to 4%, it's literally an army of door knockers for them. Those kids can go knock on doors during the school day. And they're really good at dealing, old people don't go, oh, these two kids who showed up who are 10 said to vote for this. I'm going to listen to them, right? Because they're cute,
Hmm.
right? And so getting more people to homeschool was really valuable to the Republican Party. And then the textbook makers said, we're going to make literally billions of dollars making these tests for all these states individually. All these states will not
Hmm.
agree, and so it was a conspiracy of forces who had very different motivations to all produce the same outcome. Let's force schools to advertise that they suck, right?
Kind of reminds me of the prison system, private prison systems in the
Yes.
United States, where you have for-profit prisons where they have to turn a profit and they have shareholders they have to pay out. And the only way to fill those prisons is to create laws that fill the prisons.
Right.
And so they're out lobbying Congress, lobbying state senators, and you see an increase in laws, new speeding ticket cameras, just little things that for your safety, really. It's
Right.
we're trying to help you out. And that's how it's always sold. That's how it's always been sold too, is public safety. From Nazi Germany to ancient Rome. It's always about public safety because it's the one thing that we fear. We fear being unsafe.
Well, and this goes back to something you were talking about earlier is, we're very, very bad at evaluating risk. And this is
Hmm.
so true. Human beings are terrible at this. And so you can say to somebody, and I remember this was a big one in the 80s, you could say, here's a story that's going to be on TV about a child being kidnapped by a total stranger. And people were so affected by this that they started raising their children to like not talk to strangers,
Yeah.
stranger danger, all this. It was vanishingly rare. The chance that your kid would be kidnapped by a stranger,
Yeah.
but nobody wants to go, I didn't take that seriously and I was the one exception, right? And
Right.
so
Or
everybody
I'm the one out trying to put children in danger by preaching against it.
right. And
Yeah.
so everybody just went, we will buy into this idea that was statistically completely improbable. Whereas, the real dangers to your children were people they knew, like people in the home,
Oh
your
yeah,
newscast,
yeah.
like
Boy Scout leader,
yeah,
just yeah.
that was nobody, that was not the story that was, repeated over and over. And people aren't able to look at stats. And I see this in
Hmm.
moving to Spain. There's this anti-immigrant movement here too. There's absolutely a fascist right-wing party that has said this is
Of
how we're going to
course.
capitalize. And so we've got that here. And their thing here is it's about crime, right? Well, if
Hmm.
you look up the stats, like the city of Barcelona is, it's I can't remember how many millions of people live here. It's 2.5, I think, million people. This is a huge city, right? The number of people who are actually killed, like killed, period, guns, knives, everything, is so vanishingly small. You are so safe in the city. But
Yeah.
all you have to do is say to people, be afraid of crime. And so like we'll press people a little bit and we'll go, what's the crime you're afraid of? And they'll go, well, somebody might steal your cell phone. And it's like, really, you're going to hate this whole wave of people who are coming from Morocco or whatever because they're fleeing for a better life because they're, in terrible poverty in Syria and
Yeah.
they're threatened. But maybe there's a slightly higher percentage that your phone might be stolen, but
Well,
people
so much of it
very
always
bad
comes
at
back to
evaluating
money.
risk. Yeah,
Yeah, it always comes back to money. It's like those people wouldn't be stealing cell phones if they had $10 million in the bank,
right.
just flat out. So, like, so much of crime, so much of human suffering comes from the result of money. I mean, gosh, I think it was in the 1700s or 1600s, the British Crown, like, bankrupted or defaulted on their loans from the central banking system there, ended up basically having to sell the crown to pay off their debts. Banks have kind of ran the world since banking's existed. Yeah, and there was an example.
Fascinating. We've got the Rock of Gibraltar here in Spain, and it is part of the British Empire. And there's still tension. Like Spain still wants it back, but it's still part of the British Empire. But I didn't realize this place, I had a friend who was a teacher at Central who just came to visit, and she went and saw it with her family. And one of the things they were taught about is part of the reason that the British Empire pulled out of the Revolutionary War was not about anything going on in the colonies. It was the expense of digging the tunnels and arming the Rock of Gibraltar because it was so expensive, but they felt that they had to keep control of this base because it was what they used to fight pirates, right? And so
Hmm.
they were finally like, if we have to choose the colonies or the Rock of Gibraltar, we're keeping the Rock of Gibraltar, pull those forces out. We were never
Yeah,
taught this in school, right?
right. Yeah, no, I've always found it interesting to think of America as a colony to the United or to Britain. You know, the because we know that obviously we were the 13 colonies or whatever before America broke off, but we were just a colony. That's what I always try to stress. Like we were just a colony. Like we were like India or Indonesia or Falkland
Australia, they had a
Islands or
bunch.
yeah, they
Yes,
had a
some of
bunch.
which
We
were
were just
more
one of
profitable
many.
and valuable than we were, and so they
Hmm. Oh
were
yeah.
to let it go. Well, this is something that again, undermines this kind of American exceptionalism story, and I was never taught it in school. So in during the Revolutionary War, I may have mentioned this on the show before, so folks are going to go, I'm bored. But if you have not heard this, Tad Starmer is this professor he's former U.S. Army. I think he might have taught at the not Annapolis. Annapolis is Navy, right? What's the
Yeah, I think so.
okay?
West Point.
West Point. I think he was a
Yeah,
West Point guy, and now he's at University of the Netherlands because what he started studying was resistance history, and studying resistance movements made him go, "Oh my gosh, so much of what I was taught about the United States is not true." And one of the things that was kind of eye-opening for him, and that I found to be just a fascinating story, is during the Revolutionary War, a group of as many as 20,000 slaves who were, were never told their story as though this is an intelligent group of people, right? They managed to network and share information in ways that, were risking their lives to do so and kind of organize themselves and found out that the British were so desperate near the end of the war that they were going to lose the war that they started to say, okay, we will accept enslaved or fighters if they come to join us. Well, once the word kind of got out, like 20,000 people went over and joined the British side, but this was not 20,000 fighters. It was like bringing their wives and children, like, escape. And the British had recently changed their law to include black people as human beings, like they'd written it into the law. And that was part of the motivation for the Revolutionary War was that the Southern plantation owners were like, we can't stay with the British. They might change the law and make slaves people. And so when these folks went, and it was still terrible, like they got dysentery, many of them died. The British were not prepared for this massive number of
of
people that.
course.
But then when the British pulled out, they took this group of people with them. Or some of them went to Canada, but many of them went back to England. And George Washington, when he went to negotiate the peace treaty in New York, demanded the return of those slaves. And the British said, and to their credit, sorry, according to British law, these people are people. We cannot force them all to return. And we're so often told the story of the Revolutionary War as though this was pure, heroism, like these wonderful people fighting for their independence. They were fighting to maintain their slaves. And
Yeah,
right up to the end, George Washington, who we're told is this great guy, right, is saying, give us back our property. And the British are saying, sorry, those people are human beings, right? And so
yeah.
this Tad Starmer's been studying resistance movements, and he's like, the colonies were not the resistors. These slaves were the resistors. They were the real rebels. Like they were fighting for their lives against a system that was trying to keep them down. And the colonists that we think of as the great heroes were the ones trying to maintain the status quo of slavery, right? And
Yeah.
that inversion, and one of the things that's really valuable about kind of getting out of the United States is you get away from some of the hagiography and like we're always the heroes, we're always the greatest, and go, oh no, often we were the villains. And really, even in our inception in the independence movement, we were not like yay heroes. We were trying to maintain slavery, and so that has been really good for me. It's been very eye-opening to be like, oh, okay, this a lot of what I perceived about my country was what I was fed. Like, hey,
I
we're
think
great.
this ties back into what you were talking about earlier with American exceptionalism
Yeah.
specifically. But we And specifically, you were talking about the national anthem and how we say it and how we have this nationalistic tendency. I've thought about that a lot over the last 25 years, especially having served the country
Right.
and, what are we really fighting for and things like that. And what I've come to, or what I've decided or at least where I've settled for now, is that given the types of social interactions that humans have, it is essential that we all do feel a connection to each other on a large scale. If we didn't do the things like the saluting the flag or the Pledge of Allegiance or any of that stuff, then we wouldn't have any reason to all be together. And
It's a
so I
shared
think
place.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's essential to create that shared identity and that shared culture. And so even though it is brainwashing and it is creating illusion of exceptionalism, it's a necessary component of large scale societies. And I hate that because
I agree, but I mean, I hate it, but I agree with you, and I completely understand it. I think the challenge for the United States is you can have a national identity without it being based on things that are not true. Like, and so
yeah.
countries I look to, like
Oh,
denazification.
can you?
Well, like yeah, Germany did a wonderful job after World War II of saying, the Nazis were essentially invaders from within. We are
Hmm.
not going to be like that. And if you,
Well,
wave
they
a
had to.
you viol, but we should have too. Like after the Civil War, we should have had the same kind of reckoning where we
Hmm.
said, hey, this idea of owning other human beings is wrong. This idea of white supremacy is unacceptable. And we need to essentially de-confederize, right? And
Yeah.
really address that.
Yeah,
And
it blows me away that people are still swinging Confederate flags. I'm like, it's
we have a
always
record.
bothered me that
Yeah,
anybody flew any flag other than the American flag. Anytime I see a Trump flag or Confederate flag or Biden flag, even
right.
like this is America, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're unwilling to reckon with certain truths about our country, and that is, and so it then creates this situation where people are flying the flags and feeling conflicted, right? Because they're
Hmm.
going, I'm flying this flag, and I also recognize this is still a country that up until, the 1960s, and really it persisted after the 60s, was still segregated, right? And
Hmm.
instead of, okay, we're going to end segregation, we're going to call in the military to make sure these kids can go to school, and we're not going to stop there and fire all the black teachers, which is what they did in the South. We're going to
Right.
really address this is a deep problem in our country. And we just kind of went, it's really uncomfortable to talk about the fact that we just had segregation. So let's leave the same people in charge and they'll fire all the black teachers. Like, like,
Well, it's a tough situation to be in because in America, where it's supposed to be free speech, you can't be a thought police. You
right.
can't necessarily ever stomp out racism, and racism is always going to exist in a small percentage of any society anywhere. So what do? You can't just say we're going to kill all those people and throw them in camps because that's
No,
evil.
no, no, no. But I think
But
we do have to tell the truth in a way that is America has chosen often to tell its history in this very selective way, right? Where
right.
we're like, okay, I remember when I was in school, I went to an all-black high school in Cincinnati, and there was a white teacher.
Well, it couldn't be all black. I mean,
Yeah, it wasn't. There were like five of us. Over the course
yeah.
of my 3 years in this high school, there were
Okay.
never, more than five white guys at a time. Um,
Yeah.
so, there
That
few
must have been interesting.
it was well, it was interesting, but also I didn't learn enough from it, as much from it as I should. Like it made me think, oh, I understand a lot more about the Black American experience than I actually did because I was
Did
getting
you
a lot of
experience any racism or targeting?
um, sometimes I was such a little weirdo, like with purple hair and
Hmm.
hiding behind a book, that everybody just kind of left me alone. Like I was not, threatening in any way.
Okay.
But no, I mean, my friends were wonderful. Like I was not in any danger in that way. But I would get on my bus and come back to a white neighborhood where
Hmm.
people would go, I can't believe you go to that school. I went there because there was a foreign language program that they'd very intentionally housed in this school to try and draw, mix folks together. And but it didn't change the fact that, and this is a very American thing, the teachers were white, right? And this I didn't know. Nobody taught me this when I was in school. The white teachers certainly didn't teach this in school. But after Brown v. Board, the justification for Brown v. Board was we need to let black students go to white schools because then they'll be exposed to white teachers because white people are better. Like it was still fundamentally white supremacist,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
so they, even though it was demonstrably the opposite. The black teachers, especially in the South, were the more educated, the best and the brightest of their communities. Because if you were the best and the brightest in your community in, a small town in Alabama and you were white, you could go to college and become a doctor. You could not do that if you were black, so you became either a pastor or a teacher. And so that's why so many of the great civil rights leaders were professors and pastors. Martin Luther King Jr. Well, that's because he couldn't be a lawyer. Like there was no law school to go to that would
Yeah.
let him in. And so the black teacher,
Poverty too.
yeah,
When we talk about like redlining up to the 80s, I mean,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
And so the black teachers were better, but the assumption was they were worse, right? And so then, here I am, you know, 20 some years, 30 years later than the end of the civil rights movement. And, I've got this white teacher who's going, okay, tomorrow we're going to talk about slavery to a room where I'm the only white kid. It is, entirely black faces that this person, and he was so uncomfortable. And
I bet.
I mean, can you imagine? And it
Yeah.
was like there was this recognition that like, okay, we are obligated to talk about slavery for a day, right? Not this was
A
an
day?
intrinsic
A
part of,
day?
yeah, this, not this is what the economy and half of the country was fundamentally based on, and the whole culture was
Yeah.
built around. We need to talk about that all the time. Like you can't talk about US history without talking about slavery. And yet that was one day it was really bad, moving on. And
Hmm.
if that's the way we tell ourselves our history, we're going to be waving flags, not knowing what we're waving flags for, right? And I think
Well,
there's
and also, I think it's important to note that when we talk about slavery, we often talk about American forms of slavery
yeah,
and the specific. And I know you know because you're educated, but I don't think a lot of people separate historic forms of slavery
right.
from modern slavery.
There's
And the fact
very
that
different.
everybody was slavery, it wasn't always based on race. It was
Right.
not even always based on whether you're a foreigner or not.
Oh, no, the
Um,
concept of race is relatively modern. So
yeah,
slavery
yeah.
predated race. Like you had, this group of people conquers this group of people and enslaves them.
Hmm.
But it was,
Or you get into debt and you are
right.
enslaved,
Yeah.
or you're enslaved for periods of time. Yeah.
Nothing like American slavery. Like
Right?
yeah, we really should have a different word because the kind of treatment where you'd say this person is not human and I can
Hmm.
rape them, cut their limbs off at will, like that's
Yeah.
fine, is
Torture.
different. You wouldn't do that in ancient Greece when you conquered the next town because for all you knew, the next town was going to conquer you. You didn't want them to treat their slaves that way because slavery was something many people experienced. It didn't have to do with something, intrinsic to your personhood that you couldn't
Right.
hide. And so you treated your slaves much better because you might be one tomorrow, right?
I also think it's telling to look at those historical examples because of modern economic systems.
Yeah.
And I think I was maybe 11 the first time I went, wait, so I get paid from a job and then I give the money to my landlord who gives the money to the government, who gives the money back to my employer, who gives me the money again.
Yeah.
Like I never have any money here. I'm essentially a slave. I was like 11 and I'm 40 now and I'm like I haven't really learned much in that front, which is weird because I would figure I've expanded upon it and how it fits into the world, but
Do you know about Valsets?
no, the
Okay.
oil spill or
No, no, no. That's Valdez.
oh yeah,
No,
okay, sorry, yeah.
Valsets is closer to home for you. There is a town that you could go drive to in 20 minutes from where you live in
Oh
Independence
yeah, yeah, yeah. The town out in the mountains, right?
that has been eliminated. Like it is gone, right?
Hmm.
What happened was the logging company built this whole town for the loggers and their families, and
Hmm.
then they have their school, they have their church, they have their the small little town, and you'll meet people in Independence who will say, oh yeah, I'm from Valsets, I went to that elementary school. Then what's the big logging company? It starts with a W. I'm blanking on the name.
What? Why?
Weyerhaeuser. Yeah.
Weyerhaeuser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Weyerhaeuser just went, it is dangerous for us when we decide to move on from this forest and let it grow up to leave you. I mean, it would be a liability. So they knocked all the buildings down and and kicked all the people out. And so this was,
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about another
Company towns have a big history in
it's a
America.
company town and it's
Hmm.
gone now. And you can, like there's a great documentary about it that a friend of mine made. That is, he went out and was like filming with the people who used to live there. And they're like, see these few bricks left in this kind of L shape? That's where my school was. Like that's all that remains. So
You know
yeah,
what I found was interesting? The term redneck. I didn't realize that came from the coal mine war that took place. And for people who aren't familiar, that was the West Virginia coal miners that rose up against basically a company town because they were being paid in script, meaning they were just given like piece of paper. You can use it at the store here, but you can't spend it anywhere else
Right.
in America. You live in company housing. If you piss us off, you lose your house. Like it was a really crappy situation. They worked, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and they were really fighting for workers' rights, in a very democratic sense in modern terms. Like they were very pro-union and getting out from under the gun of these evil corporations crushing
Literally
them.
gun. Like they brought in, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had machine guns and stuff too, so it was a pretty big deal. But the term redneck came from that because these guys wore red bandanas around their neck, and I thought about the fact that we have always used redneck as a derogatory term for like
Pejorative, right?
hillbillies. And isn't it interesting that we have somehow managed to flip what would be a noble cause into
Uh-huh.
something evil and derogatory in our society? I don't think that's an accident.
Yep, and for whom, right? Well, I
Right.
didn't know this till I was, whatever, in my 40s, I think. So in at the end of that, the tail end of that period of really strong unionism leading up into the early 1900s, they made nationwide strikes illegal. Now, making a nationwide strike illegal is, kind of on paper, like what can you do? Like if they actually do
Right.
it, it made it so that you couldn't organize it because if you were organizing it, you were, it was a conspiracy to commit an illegal act. And when you look at what unions have been able to accomplish here in Europe, like, if you work more than, for example, we get 30 days off paid per year. That's just normal. Everybody does that. That's in the law now because unions said, we're going to shut the country down unless you do that for this industry, then for this industry, then, okay, now it's got to be the law, right? And now even a small company has got to give me 30 days off, 30 paid days off a year. You can't even imagine a company in the United States saying, oh, yeah, all our employees get 30 paid days off, let alone every one of them doing it, right? But it's because of, if you crush unionism to that degree where you make wearing a red scarf now an insult, then you
Right.
can convince people, hey, don't be like those hillbillies and fight for workers' rights. That could lead to a danger.
My experience with unions has always been very. Obviously, I'm pro-union. I mean, I am, but in places where I have worked, where people have tried to unionize, or places I've worked where they have been unionized, it was always really annoying to me because they're like, "We want money. We're going to call you all the time. We're going to text you all the time. We want you to come to these meetings. You have to quit if everybody else quits. You have to take time off." It's like, I just want freedom, man. And so I think a lot of Americans kind of fall into that camp where they're like, I don't like unions. But realistically, the whole purpose of unions is to protect your rights. Like they only exist. Now, I know in the 50s, I don't remember that the issue, but there was some issue with the unions and corruption in
Oh yeah,
Chicago, I
so
believe it was.
there are some unions where most unions are incredibly democratic, where
Hmm.
like the teachers unions get together and have elections and anybody can run and you've got to be, and they're, I mean, the most democratic organization in Oregon by far is the Oregon Teachers Union, like the OEA, where every decision is made by a vote of it's very complex process to try and get anything done because you want to make sure there's not even a whiff of corruption, right? Because that's so
Right.
important. And that's because in a few cities in kind of the Rust Belt, so Chicago, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, those kinds of things. The the unions had these bosses where they were elected basically for life, and
Mm.
then all it took was, okay, well that person's in charge and they're in the mob, and so some of them got mobbed up, and so
Gotcha. Okay.
like the union, one of the great things that they'll do in Chicago, for example, is the unions actually work well together. And so if if the superintendent of the school district were to say, I'm not gonna negotiate a contract with the teachers and I'm gonna cut all their pay by 10%, he would find that nobody was taking out his trash, right? Because the unions help one another. Well,
Hmm.
if you allow for that kind of corruption, then it was, oh, okay, this person's not paying their tithe to the mob and nobody's taking out their trash, right? So it was like,
Hmm.
it is dangerous when you get that level of organization and then you get corruption at the top, which should be some story we should all be telling ourselves right now. Like, if you get a massive enterprise, like, I don't know, the US government, and then you allow a
Hmm.
very small number of people to get really corrupt at the top, the whole institution becomes a really dangerous machine. right?
I agree. I think that that is something that we're facing a problem with here in America too, because we are seeing a consolidation of power at the top. And I see both sides of the argument. There is, because again, I'm more centrist. I don't believe in a large government. I don't think, I believe that bureaucracy slows things down to a point that they become unmanageable. The costs skyrocket. You got to have boards to review the boards, to oversight the boards, to like,
Right.
and it can balloon infinitely. And we've seen that even in historical China. Where they had large bureaucracies that just became so bloated they were untenable. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have a single leader making all the decisions and everything's coming from one place. And we also saw the problems with that in China, where you had the famine in the 90s, I believe it was, where people starved because he said kill all the sparrows. So yeah, good ideas and good intentions can lead to bad outcomes from a dictator, and it's much more fragile. So Obama himself said, I remember seeing one little clip of him, somebody in the crowd's like, make Congress do this. And he's like, absolutely not.
Right.
I'm not going to unilaterally do that. We're going to talk about it and we're going to vote for it and we're going to have to do what we have to do, but we have to play within the rules of the system. And that's something that I think a lot of people are running into a problem with here in modern America. Like right now, people are screaming, do something. We want the Democrats to fight. We want you to do something. But I don't think people realize that this is the type of situation where they're doing all they can and it's on you now. Like it's on us to do something, because you can't ask somebody inside the democratic structure to break the democratic structure.
Right.
They're going to play by the rules until the rules die. And if they ever chose not to, it would be just as bad. So we can't ask our senators to like commit civil disobedience, that's just never going to be their role.
Well, it's not. I mean, I think role is the good term there. Like everybody needs to recognize they have a role in resistance.
Okay, in a democracy, absolutely.
And if
it's on us.
In a political office, they can only work within the rules of that political office. Otherwise, they're just undermining the office, right?
Yeah.
And, if you don't want, somebody on the other side to be able to do that, don't do that yourself, right?
Right. Become the evil you seek to destroy, kind of thing.
Right. And so those folks are not going to, the institutionalists are not going to change the institutions, right?
Right.
It's going to take people saying this institution must change from the outside. And that was a hard thing for me to kind of come to. I was very much a, party insider, like play by the rules, how is this, because I was so involved in my union, I was often saying to folks in my union, like we need to make sure that these Democratic politicians are passing laws that work with us. And they were saying, go at them from the outside. And now I'm far enough away to go, oh, they were right. Like you move the Overton window from the outside. You don't cozy up to these folks. You say, you must change to make the system better because that's my role. I'm on the outside, right? And they're used to it. They know about being pressured from outside groups. Like, that's what's required.
And that's what makes a great democracy is all these competing pressures, because we always complain about lobbyists forcing Congress to do this, that, and the other thing. It's like, well, where are you? How come you're not there? Go there, knock on their door, send them an email, call them, leave a voicemail. You have to be a part of it because otherwise only one voice is speaking. Yeah. I've always been pretty rebellious. When I was a kid, I grew up kind of rough. When I was 16, I was sleeping under the bridge there on 7th Street, just because that was my life at the time. I was very rebellious, teachers hated me. They truly did not like me because I would question everything. I would never do homework. I would never do the classwork. I remember one example was I skipped from November till June of science class in 9th grade. And I showed up the last day just for fun and I took the final and didn't think anything of it. Day went on. We were leaving school. It was the last day of school. I was walking out the back door there on the west end of Central. And Mr. Wendring was the science teacher at the time. I don't know if he's still there, but he just grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and yanked me into his classroom. And he's like, get in here. And he pulled me in there and he started just screaming at me. He's like, you got 97% on this test. And I'm like, yeah. And he was yelling at me. He's like, why didn't you ask for a harder class? Why didn't you, show up and tell me it was too easy? Like, why didn't you do? I'm like, because why would I? This was easy. I only care about what I know. I don't care if you know that I know what I know. I came to school to learn. I didn't come here to prove to you that I learned. Yeah. And I don't care about getting into college. I don't care about performing to the standards of society. I care about what's right and being correct, and like learning. So yeah, I've always had a different view of society, I feel like, than a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Rules and structure have just never really applied to me,
And
which
yet,
was weird when I joined the
I was
military.
gonna say you then went to one
Yeah.
of the most highly structured, you can't say to your superior officer, this isn't what I feel like doing.
Right. Yeah. There's absolutely none of that there. So I got a taste of both sides.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's given me a good life perspective, because I do understand what it's like to have discipline and structure. I also understand what it's like to be completely on my own and doing things my own way. And, I've explored ways in this world that I can have the most impact, the most positive impact on society. And that's where it kind of led me to this, this document, because I feel like people need inside this document, if people haven't seen it yet, there's a series of different warning signs you should be looking out for when considering whether society has gone off the rails, essentially. And I think it's really important to take it not as complete, but as literal, because I'm not saying like, oh, like for example, there's a bit in here about, when you see troop deployments to U.S. cities, that's a pretty major red flag. But that doesn't mean federalized National Guard. I'm not saying federalized National Guard. I'm not saying 5 cities of federalized National Guard it's a concern, certainly, but it's not a big red flag. A big red flag would be active duty military deployments, because the way that those are structured are completely different. And from the ground, you're not going to notice the difference, but that's why it's so important to look and go like, okay, the National Guard came to my city. They're in 10 cities now. Is this it? You can go, well, no, actually, because this is still falling under the confines of the democratic process. It hasn't seceded that quite yet. And even though it's horrible and it's definitely leaning towards that, this is the type of moment where I need to pack my bag and make sure that I have enough gas in my car, and when you can prepare in a fashion like that, one, it takes a lot of stress off you, because then it just becomes a matter of like, there it is, I saw it. Cool. Let's get in the car, and you don't have to worry about it. Your plan's in place. Your escape route. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and also even before that, it gives you something to do. So when you're saying, I'm worried, I just saw that the National Guard went into Memphis. They didn't come to my town, and they're the National Guard. They're not yet the Army, but we're clearly moving in that direction. You can just sit around your house and stress, and that does you no good. Or you
Right.
can
Yeah.
go to the store and buy a backpack and start filling that bag. Like it gives you things to do with that stress. And I think
And
that's
this is something the right does so well. I mean, I take that from the right. Like they've been prepping for years. They've been buying bunkers and going shooting and doing all this weird training and stuff like that. And as much as I'm not a prepper, I broke it down into 4 stages of advancement through totalitarianism, from like, entry signs of declaring enemies and maybe calling people vile animals or scum. Maybe you've heard some of these words thrown around
past
before.
that, right?
Yeah, we're definitely deep into that part, and we do have other parts coming in through the other sections. But you can go, okay, well, it's stage 1. In stage 1, I need to make sure that I've prepared in some fashion, and yeah, that this book will help you go through it. This booklet, I do want to offer workshops on this as well. So if people are interested in reaching out to me, I'd be more than happy to put together a little class talking specifically about how we can interpret this document, and then possibly some more workshops on diving deeper into different aspects like personal security, route planning, movements. Yeah,
Yeah.
things that are legal.
To practice your route so that you're not
Right.
doing it for the first time when you're terrified. Uh,
Exactly.
those kinds of preparation things, they sound extreme, I think, to people who've never, gone through that
Oh
process.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're there now, practicing a route out of town so that you know 2 ways to get to the place where you're going to go. Like that's just
Right.
good
And think of your kids.
planning.
You want your kids to know, like, hey, if we suddenly have to get out of town, and it doesn't even, you can, if you're against it from an authoritarian perspective, then think of it as an emergency planning thing.
Right.
Be like, okay, well, what if China invaded, or what if there's an earthquake? Like, do I know 2 routes out of town? Do my kids know which routes I'm going to take? Do we know where to meet up? Put it in more reasonable, less terrifying terms for yourself. But it's
Right.
important no matter what.
Yeah. But also, like, if you do decide you want to leave the United States, please don't do what I did, which is leave and then figure out all of the paperwork that you need in the United States. It would made it incredibly difficult. Like we literally had to reach out to people and say, "Can you go to Salem and get this file? Can you go to Washington D.C.? I kid you not. Can you go to
Oh,
Washington D.C. and get this document?" Like to
wow.
get all the paperwork together and then FedEx it to me for $100 an envelope to, so that I can turn this into the Spanish government. So going through that process of figuring out in advance instead of I'm just going to sit around and stress, what do we
Yeah.
need to put together? Do you have the there's something called an apostille. So you can't just say here's my birth certificate because
Hmm.
the foreign government says that's an official US document, all right. We're not the US government. So there is a treaty that goes back to, I don't know, the 1860s or something that says these are the documents we will accept from each other. And so you have to have an apostille that's attached to that birth certificate that the other country recognizes. I had no
Hmm.
idea about this. So doing that learning and planning about what documents will you actually need when you show up so that you don't, because if it's the kind of emergency where you have to drive out of town, it's also the kind of emergency where you can't have somebody go to Salem for you and get paperwork, right?
Yeah. Your
So
time's up at that point.
yeah, so
So,
what do you need to do to get that kind of prepared so that if you were like, I have to drive across the Canadian border and then I'm going to hop on a plane and I'm going to go to Uruguay. Well, what does Uruguay need? Right?
mhm.
Because it's not the same as what Canada needs. And so
Right.
figuring out what each country is going to require of you is something for you to work on that will actually take away your stress. I know it
Right.
sounds like it's, catastrophizing, but it's not. It's preparedness. And
Yeah.
preparedness relieves stress.
And it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all.
Right.
That it makes you feel better, like you said, and also, it's just fun. It's kind of fun to think about moving to another country or seeing how that works. Like, I went and got my passport last week. I put in the application for it. I've never had one,
Yeah.
but it's like if something did happen, and that's where we're at in the preparation stages. It's like it's time to get a passport.
Yeah.
It's time to make sure I have maybe $1,000 or $2,000 tucked away in a sock somewhere.
Yeah, literally so that
Because
you could buy that plane ticket, right? You
right,
gotta have
but
it.
yeah, yeah. There's just a lot of a planning that can help you for
Although I
sure.
will tell folks, this is one of those funny things when we were getting our plane tickets, I think of, international travel as being just so exorbitantly expensive. And it
Mhm.
is. There are a lot of parts of it that are, but the one thing that was surprisingly inexpensive was the plane tickets. You know why? Because they're one way.
Ah, yeah, yep.
I
I
was like,
think
wait, I can go to Barcelona for only this amount of money? Yeah, because if I
yeah.
took vacation, it'd be twice as much. I'd have to fly home. Like, so
Hmm.
when, but yes,
Yeah.
start saving money now. Again, it's just preparation.
Right. And if you're in a situation where you're like, hey, I make minimum wage, I can barely make my bills, I can't really afford to save money, then maybe consider some alternatives, be like, okay, well then I'll stockpile food.
Right.
Or I'll fill up my backpack and be like, okay, I'm not somebody who can afford to flee the country. I'm going to need to go to Burns, Oregon, something like that, where you're just like, I'm gonna get out of the major cities. I'm gonna get to a place where they're not going to deploy the National Guard. I'm gonna go
Well,
somewhere where they're not
100%.
looking for.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's going to be eye-opening to folks because I hear this a lot. Like, I can't afford to go to another country, and I'm like,
Mhm.
please bear in mind, so many of the people who come to the United States literally did it with the shirt on their backs. You can afford to leave the country. You can't afford to leave the country in the style you're accustomed to, right?
Yeah.
You could get on a Greyhound bus and you could take that to Spokane, Washington, and you could walk across the border into Canada. It would
Yep.
be you would be an illegal immigrant into Canada, but it may get to the point where you're going to go, that's better than making my 4-year-old take up arms against the US military, right?
Hmm.
And so if that's the option, if it's I'm too poor to save up money, maybe figure out about how you're going to cross the border with your kid,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Rather than how I'm
And I
going.
gotta say, not to fearmonger, but Andrew Bustamante, are you familiar with him, the CIA guy?
Oh,
He announced like 2 weeks ago he's leaving the U.S. too. He's
yeah.
like, it's done.
Oh, yeah.
We're just a matter of time before it's done. And that's coming from the most diehard pro-American
Right.
CIA operative I've ever seen. I
Yeah.
mean, I love that guy because he is as pragmatic and crazy as they come. Like he is cutthroat. He's like, what laws? I'll
Yeah.
kill anybody to serve America. Also, I'm leaving
Yeah.
because it's terrifying. So
Gonna go. Yeah. one of the big eye openers for me was Timothy Schneider, who wrote On Tyranny and On Freedom. He was one of
Hmm.
the people who was one of the scholars saying, You're going down that path, right?"
Yeah.
And I recommend to everybody read On Tyranny. On Freedom's a big fat book. On Tyranny is like this very short book that's just like these basic rules, like don't obey in advance. And
Hmm.
when he and his wife, who are both professors, I believe at Yale, went, we're going to take a sabbatical and then go teach at the University of Montreal. We're getting out because
Hmm.
she was a history professor. They were like, we see where this is going, and I was like,
Yeah.
that is telling. So yeah, the people who are aware are, and there are a lot of, very wealthy celebrities who've left because they have the luxury, right?
Right.
Richard Gere just moved here to Madrid, like, so like, these famous wealthy people are able to, Rosie O'Donnell, I'll just
Hmm.
relocate to Ireland. Like that
And
is
see, this is
not
all
what,
happening quietly. We hear in history of these big mass exoduses in advance of authoritarian takeovers, but we're not hearing about it now. We're hearing, oh, this guy left, that guy left, this
right,
guy left. But in 20 years, we're going to look back and say, wow, 300,000 people fled the country in that period, and we weren't paying attention.
right,
So I'm not saying it's time to flee, and your individual goals will depend on what you are capable of and
right.
what you're willing to do. Um,
But I love that your plan is start thinking about it. Don't do it spur of the moment. Plan
mhm.
it out. Like the
Yeah.
more you can, I read this a political activist from Myanmar where they had this oh no, she was from the Philippines, and the Philippines fell to Duterte essentially. They became an authoritarian government came into power, and one of the points she was making is you will never be as free to confront the Trump administration as you are today, which is a
Yeah,
really
that's a
kind of
very
reality.
true statement.
The power is consolidating. And so if
Hmm.
you're going to fight back, you fight back today, you will do a less effective job if you wait till tomorrow. But in the same way, you are never as free to plan an exit as you are today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow will be harder. And the
And
next
if
day,
you wait till the tier one stuff goes off, if you wait till the borders lock down, I mean, anytime before the borders lock down, you're going to feel like an alarmist. You're going to feel like,
right. Oh, people
I'm
will say,
overreacting. Nothing's
people
happened.
will say you're
Yeah.
overreacting.
I
Now
even
these
said it
very
to
same,
you.
oh yeah,
So, yeah.
now these very same people are calling me and they're like, how do I do what you did?
Right, exactly. And that's exactly it. Like cuz if you wait until the borders are closed, if you wait and say like, "Oh my God, they're cracking down in my town. I need to go get a passport." You're too late.
Too
You're
late.
too late. You're not going to get there in time.
Well, if
So,
you hadn't left when we did, this is something that I think a lot of Americans don't know about. If you had an X gender marker on your passport, they invalidated your passport on day one, under
oh
one.
really?
So I was saying to my wife, even as people were saying to us, you're totally overreacting, you don't need to leave. And I was saying to my wife, we can wait a few more days. Like it's not a big deal if it takes us into February. I'm sure they're not going to be able to do anything as soon as they take office. Day one,
Yeah.
they invalidated my kid's passport. My kid is non-binary. They would not
Mhm.
have been able to leave if we'd waited one more day. And
Really?
so, yeah,
Leave, not enter, but leave?
yeah, we would have gone to the desk at the Portland airport, and they would have said your passport is no longer valid, and we
Really?
would have been able to get on the plane. Like, yeah, and so there were a bunch of
Wow.
folks, even in the first few days where we got here, were on social media and hearing from a lot of non-binary trans folks who were going, my passport is now invalid. And
Mm.
what do I do? Do I declare a gender that I do not actually have in order to get a passport so that I can get out? And a lot of folks were making that choice. They were saying, I fought so hard for my non-binary nature to be recognized, and now I'm having to lie and say I am one gender or the other so that I can get a passport and get.
Well, a simple solution if people are in that trap now, you don't have to show your passport to cross over the border into Canada. I mean, you'll show it to the Canadian authorities, but you won't show it to the US
Yeah,
authorities. And Canadian authorities probably aren't going to have the same standards. So drive to Canada, hop on a plane there. There you
right,
go.
right.
So,
But even that could change. I mean, I'm
yes.
getting your passport and getting a valid one will be really, and you do some research. Will the country you're going to recognize a passport that the US government says is invalid?
Hmm.
And so we were very lucky. The Spanish government said you got in time, and so they said we will continue to recognize this passport because when you came it was valid. I'll bet you there are countries that now are saying, sorry, you had a valid passport when you arrived, but it was invalidated by your government. You have to leave. So,
That's very likely, especially when you're talking about the big U.S. ally countries.
well,
You know, that's why places, and this is the problem too, because like basically any first world country is going to be a U.S. ally.
right.
So they all have extradition treaties. They all have, yeah, and that's something to look into. Look into what countries have extradition treaties with the United States,
Yeah.
because these countries may still, they may, you know, things may change. They may go like, hey, the US has fallen off. We're not going to send people back there, but you're gambling with your life
Right.
right then. So think about
Norway,
it.
I believe, has either approved or they're in the process of it was proposed in in their parliament to offer political asylum to specifically LGBTQIA plus folks from the United States. So
Good to
there
know.
are some countries just starting to say, "Oh, this is something we're going to have to do." But like here in Spain, especially like UK, a lot of Americans want to go to a place where they speak the language. I don't expect the UK, Ireland will offer political asylum to Americans because, like you said, this is an ally. They don't want to upset. And
You
so
know what was crazy? I'm sorry to like butt in, but we fought a war. You know, we were talking about the Revolutionary War earlier. Does anybody else find it crazy that our leader tweeted the other night from the Royal Palace in England that he would be cracking down on domestic extremism in the United States? I'm like, didn't we fight a war over people in palaces in England saying stuff like this to us?
uh-huh.
Like this is kind of the same exact thing. I know he's not a monarch, but he's hanging out with a monarch in a palace
In a
tweeting this
palace,
at
right.
us from across the ocean.
It
Like,
is telling, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
a little
and
repeat of history.
it's funny because when you ask, if you there's polling where if you go back to the 90s and you ask people, should we have a dictatorship in the United States? That idea used to get like 5 or 6%. It was so low that it was lower than the number of people who said that they believed in lizard people. Like it was Americans did not want a dictator, and that
Hmm.
number has been inching and inching and inching up. And
Hmm.
even going back to George W. Bush, he would like make jokes about this job would be a lot easier if I was a dictator, and everybody would kind of go ha ha ha. And it was like
Right.
that idea was starting to take hold on the right. Like sometimes dictatorship is okay. Well, once you get that idea to be acceptable, right? And so now if you poll people, there are a lot of folks who would say if Trump was a dictator, it doesn't bother me.
Well,
And
what's interesting to me too is the fact that our very foundation, you know, was based on primarily the Roman system with the Senate and the House and the consuls in Rome, but currently a modern presidency. And the whole purpose of that was to marry the ideas of representatives of the people, representatives of the elite, and a dictator. Everybody gets the best of both worlds. You know, you get your people who represent your local district, you get your senates who represent the elite, and you get your king.
right,
And it's supposed to be that sort of balance. So from the very foundation of our country, there have been people who supported monarchy, supported fascism, supported authoritarianism, and that's okay because I hate to say that so cavalier, but it is a fundamental right of anybody in a free society to have their beliefs, and those people need representation too. Otherwise, we're not really a free society. So the problem is when it becomes a dominant theory, and when we have a dominant theory of, hey, everybody should have a right to vote. Like, not everybody should have a right to vote, but every individual, like radical democracy, free democracy, that's one extreme where we say every vote should count for one vote. And that can lead to a lot of things like slavery probably wouldn't have been abolished if we'd all voted on that.
right.
Civil rights movement would have definitely failed if we'd all voted on it.
Well, not if we
So,
all, if white people
well,
don't,
well,
right?
yes, yes, exactly, because only white people could vote, you know?
Right,
So,
exactly.
right, yeah. So we have to have some sort of hierarchy and larger objective being imposed upon us. So it's not that some form of authoritarianism is unacceptable to us. It's when it becomes the dominant form that it becomes a problem. Because
Well,
once you have that,
and
you can't go back.
do you know about Popper's paradox?
What's that?
So this is the paradox of tolerance. So what Popper pointed out,
Oh,
Popper was if you tolerate intolerance, you are saying everybody gets the right to share their view on
hmm,
equal here on this public square. And one person in the public square is saying, yeah, let's kill all the people who disagree with me. You have to have
yeah,
the ability to say, no, that idea is not acceptable. Because
right.
if you tolerate intolerance, then eventually that guy's the only one left on the square, and
Yeah.
intolerance just wins.
Germany was a perfect example of that.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
Karl Popper, German, right? And so you do
Okay, yeah, there we
have
go.
to, right? And so you do have to have the ability to say, there is a political ideology that we will, you can have it, but we are going to refuse to tolerate it in public discourse. In other words, if you stand up and say, "Hey, I think this group of people, by virtue of their, race or their religion or whatever, are subhuman," we can say, "We no longer take you seriously." And if we lose that as a culture, and we really did have that to a pretty strong degree by I would say late 90s, early 2000s, like you couldn't just stand up and go, "Okay, I guess I'm a racist," right? And we've now crossed that threshold where there are a lot of folks who are saying, "I am so concerned about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can't even say diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm just going to keep calling it DEI like it's a boogeyman." And if you press them, they'll go, "You're going to call me a racist. I guess I'm a racist." Like that would never have happened in 2001. That person would have lost their job, right? But
Yeah.
now it's so polarized that somebody can declare themselves a racist, and it is
Or a
socially
fascist.
right. Or if and within this one, yeah, I don't know if you saw that debate with what's the
I
journalist,
think the whole world saw it.
right? Where the guy's
Wasn't it Jubilee or something like
yeah,
that?
and
Yeah.
it's just wild to go. We've now crossed that place where it is now we have decided to tolerate that. Well, once you're tolerating that, that's in the public square. It's just acceptable, and
Right. But the
that's
problem
accepted. Everything
becomes,
else will be unaccepted.
yeah, the problem becomes who's deciding, who's deciding what right think is, who's deciding what, because I've heard so many people, especially on the left, talk about that, like about how we need to educate people. And I'm like, that is just straight out of the communist book. Like, oh, we need to re-educate people and right think, that's the solution. It's like, that's not the solution. It's also the solution, but it's not the solution. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right. Well,
And so,
there's a difference between education and brainwashing, and finding
right.
that
Yeah.
actually really hard. Like it's,
Yeah.
it's
We've never figured it out.
but we educate people without saying you must think the following. And that's, I used to teach, this
It's
is
incompatible.
a very simplistic example, but in teaching a language, you say, this is the proper way to say this. This is the improper way to say this. Well, that's not how language works. Like language is incredibly democratic. Like however people talk is the right way, right? But
Right.
the teachers then are trying to say to students, I want you to, be able to be successful and navigate this culture, and therefore you have to speak in the proper way. There is no proper way. What I've learned over time to say, this is the more common way, this is the more formal way, but it's not right or wrong, right? But figuring out how to do that and empower people with education rather than saying you must do things in the right way, that's really hard for educators.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I imagine you were in a tough spot. Like, I couldn't imagine being a high school teacher or a teacher at all in times
I
like
love
this.
it. Like,
Because,
don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoy it. But you are doing this thing. I remember there was a colleague of mine who was like who was the worst principal I ever worked for. The guy was absolutely awful in a whole lot of ways, but he said this thing that was true. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. He said, being an educator is dealing with as much hypocrisy as you can bear. And he was absolutely right. Like you go home and you look yourself in the mirror and you go, did I help those students today or did I disempower them today by telling them this is the way you're supposed to be, right? Is that going to give them more opportunities in the future and therefore it justifies it, or am I creating conformity? And there's always this balancing act, right? And you can get to the place where you're going, I am feeding into a machine that does things to, especially my kids of color, my kids who have deal with poverty, where I'm basically saying to them, it's all your fault that you are suffering, because if you just had the right amount of education, your life would be easy. Like, no, that's just not true. You are dealing with structural factors that are going to be so much harder for you than the student sitting right next to you. And if I create the illusion that the system is fair and meritocratic, I'm lying to you. And that's
but also by discussing just that, you're reducing resilience because people feel that, hey, I am a victim. I didn't have fair advantage. Like I have a reason to feel negative and not succeed in my life. So yeah, it puts you in a tough spot, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible. Yeah, you cannot say to someone,
Yeah, it's impossible.
the system is fair, and you also can't say to them, give up. Right? Right. So
Right.
the system is not fair. Keep trying anyway.
And young minds, like they're really not built yet to truly process those higher level thoughts. Like that's what I loved about going to college specifically, was the fact that you got to explore things way deeper and really challenge your thinking. I mean, God, I'll never forget the sociology class where it was a 2-hour class. I had like 2 or 3 days a week. And he went on for like an hour and a half about why Mexicans were inferior to Americans or to white people.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he did this in a classroom full of Mexican people too.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, he was like, and so therefore, Mexicans are inferior. Any questions? And everybody's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, do you have a problem with that? Okay, well, explain why. And he was just challenging us, you know,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because I'd never been approached that way because I was like,
Oh, yeah.
no, like, no, that's not true. And he's like, but why? But why? Like, think about it. You have to truly understand because these are facts. So why is it not true?
Yeah.
And I have thought about it for 20 years now, you know, and obviously I've come to many conclusions and I've understood why it's not true. But it's interesting to see how manipulation can work in that department, you know, and that's what he was trying to show. You know, he wasn't a racist. He was the most feminist, like, yeah, he was definitely far left. So it was an interesting experience.
That's a great experience, and you're right. You couldn't do that in a public school with ninth graders.
Oh God, no. Yeah.
Inappropriate, right? They're not ready, and so they would just go. My teacher told me this. It's true. Like you have to have a certain level of maturity among your students to even do an exercise like that, where you say,
Right.
push back on this, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, with you know with kids, it's this level of care where you're going. I need to say things to you to get you to the next level, which imply that this is this universal and and inescapable truth. But I want you to be the kind of person who pushes back later. Like, and that's that's a very difficult thing to handle.
This is why I think logic needs to be taught because I took a class, it was a philosophy 201 critical thinking logic, and they talked about how you can break down news articles into mathematical equations and determine whether their arguments are true. Understanding logical fallacies, like that's something I think we need to teach all throughout public education. And I found it really interesting that we didn't, or at least we didn't in my experience.
Oh no, we
So
don't.
we
And
don't. Okay.
I offered to teach a philosophy class. I was a philosophy major, and every time,
Oh, okay.
"Okay, what classes would you like to teach next year?" And I would always say, I would love to teach a philosophy class. And the administrations would always say, no way, that's really, really dangerous. Because if you start having people think logically, one of the things that will inevitably happen is they're going to say, this thing about my society, this thing that my parents say, this thing that is, accepted in our community just doesn't make sense. And that's very threatening to the administration. People are going
That's
to come
true.
back and say, wait, this kid came back saying this is totally illogical. Yeah, it is. Like there's a lot of elements of society that are nonsensical.
But like you said, tolerance, the Popper's fallacy or whatever it was. If we continue to say like, okay, then we won't teach logic to kids, then we're just enabling it. And, if the parents are mad because they're wrong,
Yes, out of fear of the parents, we preserve the irrationality of the system.
well, and we kind of have to, which is interesting.
Well, and those parents are not doing that because they're nefarious, evil, awful people. They're doing it
yeah,
because they weren't taught logic, right? And
right.
their parents weren't taught logic. And so yeah, we preserve and really the education system, and this is cynical but true. Like when it was designed, our modern education system anyway, it was designed in this real classist way where it was like, here is education. It's really beneficial to people who run factories to have employees who can read the instructions, not chop their hands off in the big shiny
Right.
machinery. So we're going to teach them what they would say reading, writing, arithmetic, but really it was like the absolute basics to survive in a factory job, right?
Yeah.
And so you weren't trying to teach them how to become self-actualized people because what are they going to do? Start a union? You don't want that. You teach them just enough that they'll go to work and do what they're told, right?
Yeah, people got to remember the Henry Ford Foundation helped fund public education in the beginning. That's not because he was a kind-hearted individual.
No, the guy was not literally a Nazi,
Yeah.
Nazi sympathizer. But it was, let's have workers who can continue to be workers, right? And then there was this, separate whole track that was very much based in, kind of a European model and, private tutors and that kind of stuff for the wealthy. And it was, they're eventually going to go to law school and they're going to make the decisions, right? And so public ed was for common people. And as much as, public education now serves 95 point something percent of the American public, like, public education is not under threat of, being overwhelmed by private schools or anything. Most kids go to public school. But the public school is still designed at its base around teaching kids how to go to work. And we would deal with this tension all the time, even among colleagues, where, we'd be going, we want these kids to be free thinkers. We also want them to be employed, right?
Right.
Well, if that's kind of a limit, then we're limiting what we can teach kids. We're saying, they got to play by the rules.
You know, a great example. It was kind of when I lost my faith in the education system. I was in seventh grade. I was taking a social studies class, I believe it was, and we had to do those, what are they, sim tests or something like
Yes.
that? Or
Those are the
yeah,
ones that No Child Left Behind. The big companies were making a ton of money off those.
right. So we had to do these sim tests, and I decided to go above and beyond. I don't remember exactly what the project was on, but it was supposed to be like a two-page report on something in certain format, you know, all the rules you got to follow. And I ended up writing this like 25-page report on a topic I was really passionate about. And I remember going in detail and doing a bunch of work, research, and like going to the library. I had 128% A in that class. Like I did all my extra work, you know, all the what's the word? Extra
Extra
credit.
credit.
Yeah, sorry, it's been a while.
Yeah.
And I was really passionate about it. And I turned this paper in and I get the grade back and it's like a 2 out of 5 or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, which is below failing. And the reason listed was because I forgot to write my middle initial on the paper. And they dropped me down and I failed the test. And I'm like, I'm done. Like
Yeah.
I'm not playing this game. If this is how the rules of the game work, I'm out.
Well,
Like
I mean,
this,
that's a great example of that conspiracy. So the whole conspiracy was we want to it was presented to especially inner city schools. Hey, wouldn't it be great if you had to tell your community that your school was not a good one so that people could then choose another school, right? And so it was, we'll create these tests and then you'll have to give out a report card. What they didn't say to folks directly was, this is being promoted by people who want the schools to be failures. And so the way those tests were designed was to generate a report card that said your local school sucks. And we had to
really?
send that
Okay.
home every year. So that kind of test, which you like immediately recognize, this test is total bullshit, right? This test
Yeah.
is, I'm doing above and beyond, and it's saying that I failed. That we were aware, kind of behind the scenes, that was the point. And it was being
I see.
forced on us all the way up through the federal level to then send out a report card. And every year the tests would get skewed in such a way. And they were like, we're improving the test. Well, it would be skewed so that no matter what you were going to say to parents, last year your school got a C, but this year it got a D, and the next year it got an F. Shouldn't you be, starting to vote for vouchers and sending your kid to a private school?
I
Like,
see. That makes
maybe
sense.
it was all about PR, right? It was an anti-school PR move. But what if we can force the schools to do their own PR to say that they suck? And so it
That
was
sounds like America to me.
right. It was totally nefarious from the jump, but it was the people who were promoting it within the, especially in, very large cities were well-meaning. They were like, "Oh, this sounds great. We know our school has been underfunded. If we could just get more attention to that fact, maybe we'll get funding." And instead, it was never about funding. The schools never got funded. They just had to tell parents, "Hey, your school sucks. Your school sucks. Your school sucks." So it was a really cleverly done conspiracy of people who wanted to force people to believe that the public schools are terrible.
Right.
It worked.
Yeah, this is some of the downsides of capitalism. You know, I do truly believe that capitalism is one of the best systems to ever be created. I do, because it allows the most freedom. But on the other side of the coin, unchecked capitalism is just as evil as any other type of authoritarian system in the world. And we've seen example after example after example of that. From Israeli lobbying in the US Congress to uh, systems like you just discussed to, oh man, Amazon colluding on book prices with Barnes and Noble
Well, and
to
that's a great example too, because capitalism. We can say capitalism allows for freedom, but
Mhm.
late stage hypercapitalism doesn't. Like
Right,
it
yeah.
uses that one advantage.
And it always builds to that. That's
And
the thing. Like
exactly,
it all,
Piketty. I don't know if
yeah.
you've read about Piketty's, this economist out of France, where he kind of looks at the math behind the
Mhm.
way capitalism always works, and he's like, it always inevitably leads to a place where it no longer is a functioning market, right? It
Yeah.
gets to this income inequality that's insurmountable. You know,
And our solution is always just to apply more laws or put more, you know, restrictions on it. It's like, yeah, so was everybody else's. That
right?
was everybody's plan always, and it never worked,
Yeah.
you
Well, I
know?
mean, yeah,
So,
you have a. I mean,
well, yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Can't say never.
right, right. I mean, the solution to the danger of capitalism is having a mixed economy. And we actually do in the United States, but we hate it. Like, we're like,
Hmm.
oh, we hate that libraries are, and you see this in independence. Like, the library's not making enough money. Libraries aren't supposed to make money, you know?
Right. And the city's not making enough money. And the museum, I mean, we're going to have to close the museum this year. And that really frustrates me.
And that's a lack that is that commitment to capitalism over a mixed economy. Like you say, hey, guess what? Having a society that is nice for everybody involved, nobody's going to be able to become a billionaire because we're going to tax the shit out of the people at the top so that we can have libraries and museums and firefighters. I mean, these are things that are, your fire department is inherently a socialist enterprise. It should not make money. And there was a place in Tennessee where they literally privatized the fire department. And if people didn't pay, then the house next door caught fire, it would just burn to the ground. And the firefighters would come out to your house and you'd paid your bill and they'd put out your house and let the other house burn. And that's what privatization leads to, is ultimately it's everybody for themselves, right?
Yeah.
To have a true functioning market, you must have some measure of socialism. You must have public education, firefighters. I would go so far as to say, public healthcare system, a public utilities. Everybody needs electricity, right?
Yeah.
And so
basic human rights stuff.
Right. Then the benefits of the free market can still work on top of that. But that's democratic socialism. And if you say democratic socialism in the United States, Americans go, you said democratic socialism, I heard communism, right? They right away go, that's something totally different. And we're like,
right. And I don't think a lot of people even recognize how many aspects of socialism we already have in our lives. Right. It's pretty common already. It's just a few extra things. And, I do have problems with the things like socialized healthcare only because I deal with VA healthcare. So I have firsthand experience of what it's like to have the government run the healthcare system. I called 2 days ago to set up an appointment. Soonest appointment was January. So, and this is for getting medication. So I have to wait till January to get medication.
Trust me, having moved here, that is one of the things that has just floored us. Having truly universal government-run healthcare, we call up and they're like, we can get you in 2 days, and it will be like, it is fully free. Like we'll literally go, how much do we owe you? And they look at us like we're crazy. Like, no, we all pay taxes. The healthcare is free, right? My wife went into the doctor. The doctor themselves was like, I think you need an X-ray, and walked her up to the X-ray, and then took the X-ray.
You didn't have to drive to another building a month later?
No, on another day. It was in the same, and then like the doctor, not a separate tech, like read the X-ray, and was like, oh, I think you need to follow, like, the healthcare system is designed around serving the public rather than I'm nervous that I'm going to get sued or I'm nervous that the insurance company isn't going to pay me. And so I'm not going to offer you these services today. I'm sorry, I've got to run that by your insurance company. Like when it is truly universal, it is remarkable how many efficiencies, they can find that our system just doesn't have, where it's like, oh, you're a specialist and that specialist is going to be billed to the VA. Like, all that stuff is just eliminated. There is no, everybody's in the same system. We're all in this together. And the doctor, I was talking to a doctor about it, and he was like, yeah, your system makes no sense to us. Like if somebody is, if somebody is houseless, because the system is not perfect here, there are, homeless people. But if somebody is houseless and they're like having a stroke or, they've got cancer or whatever, they would be offered complete care. Because the medical system is available to everyone. And so, once you've been in a place where you've got truly universal healthcare, you're like, why would any country ever choose to, for example, tie your healthcare to your employment? So if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. That's bonkers.
That was always a weird thing to me, too. They're like, do you want to sign up for Cobra? And I'm like, what? They're like, no. Oh, it's only $1,000 a month for health insurance. Cool.
Know, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got pneumonia at one point in, I think, 2008. And I went to the ER. I was coughing up blood. So that's what finally made me go in. And I went
Americans don't go in immediately. That's the other thing.
Oh, yeah, no.
People
I would never.
Like, I don't feel well. They go to the doctor, they get it treated. My wife broke her pinky, and she broke it, and she was like, it'll probably be fine. And we didn't go in for like months because we're used to, you don't go into the doctor, right? So you waited until you were coughing up blood before you went to the ER. Here you would the next day, and they would have said, well, yeah, let's just treat it. Which is cheaper, right?
Right. Yeah, so I go in there, I go in at like 11 o'clock at night, I'm out by 4 a.m., so I'm in there like 5 hours. I see, I don't know, a dozen people come through, a tech, a note person, a nurse's assistant, maybe a doctor, I don't know, like they're maybe there for a minute or two. They drew like a whole ton of blood, and they gave me 2 bags of an IV fluid. And I got the bill a couple weeks later. It was $23,000 for 5 hours in the ER. And
That
and
would have
I
been entirely free.
right. Luckily, I had VA coverage, so it was completely free to me too. But I'm like, I don't think they would charge $23,000 if individuals had to pay it. They only do it because yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things I found. So, when we were doing our union work, we're, negotiating a contract or whatever, and I got to see this very, very clear thing that a lot of people don't see. It's like, oh, I have a job, and therefore I have insurance, and therefore I don't have healthcare costs. And I'm like, no, no, you don't understand. Every time we sat down to negotiate your salary, the company goes, we have this much in insurance costs, so that's that much of your pay you're not getting. And so people think, oh, well, if I could just get a job, I'd have free healthcare. No, if you had universal healthcare, tack on an extra, in our case, at the public school system, so this was not like we were wealthy people by any means, everybody would have gotten about a $12,000 a year pay increase if we had universal healthcare.
Wow.
$12,000 that was being cut from their pay. And so, when Americans are like, oh, I don't know, our taxes would go up. I'm like, your wages have been cut so dramatically by your healthcare costs. You have no idea how much that, oh yeah, what if your taxes went up by 2,000 whole dollars a year and you got $12,000 more a year? Like,
Right.
take that deal in a heartbeat. But
Yeah, it's interesting because being on the budget committee, I've taken a look at the budget documents for City Independence, obviously. One thing that really caught me off guard is we're spending like $220,000 per police officer.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, yeah, they get a $75,000 salary and then we pay $145,000 in taxes and benefits on the back end.
Yep.
And nobody talks about that,
So then we say we're so easily manipulated as Americans into, oh, the European system is expensive because the taxes are higher. And it's like, no, no, no. If you took those police officers' taxes and literally doubled them, but you gave them that other 107, like you gave them I mean, their expenses, are even higher. But yeah, you gave them all that they're getting in insurance and all those things that here is just government provided. They would be making way more money. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a scare tactic. Oh no, communism. Like, no, communism is not going to make you poorer. Socialization of certain industries still allows the free market to flourish. Barcelona is a very wealthy place, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of
Well, and I
business.
do want to separate communism from socialism because they're
Very
not the same
different.
thing. Yeah.
Very, very
Communism is definitely a more authoritarian version of socialism. So I'm opposed to authoritarianism on either side because, whether it's fascism or communism, they can both lead to off and have and always have
Oh
led to
yeah, well
awful
that
lot.
was George Orwell's point is if you get Stalin, if you get to a point, it's just the exact same thing. Like
It is.
it
Yeah.
can go far enough that they become, and it has to do with power. Like if you get to the place where, if you had a communist system, but it was like there are communes down in Corvallis where the people choose to live there and they share all their wealth. That kind of communism, great, wonderful. That's totally fine. If it's enforced, you must all
Right.
be equal. Who decides who's equal? And we know every time you put
Some of us are just more equal than others.
exactly, you end up with a decider who says,
Yep.
I have decided that my role is to have all the power, right?
God, Animal Farm was such a powerful book. I mean, we're all familiar with the story. I'd been familiar with the story since I was a kid, but reading it, like actually reading it and going like, oh my God,
Okay, so
like,
if you like it, you got to come visit me. George
yeah.
Orwell Square is up the block from me. He
Oh,
wrote
is
that
it?
book while he was in Spain. So
Okay.
yeah, he was fighting on behalf of the anti-fascists in Spain during the Spanish Civil War.
I found his journals really interesting.
Yep.
Have you ever read his journals?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I am
Yeah.
not so George Orwell. His side lost, by the way. The fascists did take power, but he was fighting here, and he was betrayed by the Soviets. Within on the anti-fascist side, they teamed up with the communists, and the communists then kind of changed when Stalin took power, and in Russia, USSR back then, and they ended up fighting amongst themselves. And so he had the story, one of my favorite Orwell stories. He had been shot in the neck by a sniper's bullet and survived. This guy was a badass. Like the stories of his
Yeah,
life.
he was.
So he's in this hospital here in Spain and finds out Soviet forces from his own side are going to assassinate him because he's been arguing. He was writing Animal Farm and he's arguing that the far left and the far right are essentially the same if they get too far. and the Soviets found this very threatening. And so, with a bullet hole in his neck, he escapes the hospital and leaves the country. Like when doctors were like, "If you stand up, you'll die." Like that's the guy, but it was you can't wait around for the Soviet spies to kill you, right? So yeah, he was an
He was
amazing.
a very forward-thinking individual, and given the life experience he had and the time he grew up in, I think times like that are equivalent to times like these, where we're going to see a lot of forward-thinking people who end up being right historically
Well,
when we
and I
look
think
back.
also, like Orwell, one of the lessons we can take from Orwell's life is he was born in India and he grew up as, a Brit in India. Literally, he went to work as one of his first jobs was as a policeman for the British Empire and was beating up on resistance fighters in India, right? We need to be saying to people, you can be on kind of the wrong side of history and it doesn't make you irredeemable. You can come back from that. And if we
Yeah,
treat people like, oh, you were wrong because you wore a red hat when you were in high school, and so you're irredeemable, we'll never win. Like you have to say to
no,
people, you can recognize, you have to acknowledge error. You have to go, boy, I was tricked, right? This a lot
yeah.
of this, I was fooled to get kind of back on the right side of history, but you are not irredeemable. Everybody can do that and go, the guy was a con man, and I admit I was conned. Okay,
Yeah.
like then you're back, back in my good graces as far as I'm concerned. You can
Well,
stand
and
against
that's
fascism.
That's why I feel it's so important for us to take a step back from the outrage we feel on social media, because we have to always be looking at how we're emotionally responding to what we see. And if you find yourself being angry or outraged or incredulous or, inspired even or filled with hope, you need to take a look at how that's impacting your decision making, because as long as we continue to allow these things to impact us, we're going to continue fighting ourselves. Like it's intolerable for me to accept a MAGA guy as long as he supports MAGA because I believe it's true evil. And it's like, well, then you guys are screwed. Like we're just screwed if that's going to be the solution. And so if we want to have any hope of bringing it back down, which I don't hold a lot of hope that there is, I
Right.
really don't, because historically there have been a few instances where we've dialed back, where things have been chilled, media's been chilled, society's been chilled, but then it ended. India was probably a good example of that. 1975, India, 1975 to 77, they arrested like 110,000 people they believed to be dissidents. But then at the end of the day, the prime minister stepped down, government continued, people were freed from jail, and time went on. So it's not always going to be a slippery slope. And speaking of logical fallacies, slippery slope argument. If you're
Right.
going about your day saying, "Oh, Trump's bringing the National Guard," I have to immediately, like go blow up a transformer. You're letting the slippery slope argument get to you.
Well, and yeah, and that's one of those things where people will say it's a slippery slope, and those of us who've taken logic have to say slippery slope is the name of a fallacy. Just because you go to
Right.
this point does not mean you necessarily will go to this point. Like, I would say to people, a slippery slope argument is we shouldn't raise the speed limit 5 miles per hour, or else we're just going to raise it 10, and next thing you know, we're going to be going an infinity number of miles per hour. Like, no, you can raise
Yeah.
the speed limit by 5 miles per hour, and it does not mean it must go up indefinitely. But
Yeah.
yes, we are totally susceptible to if we make this step, then we'll make the next one. No, not
And it's
necessarily. We'll
basic
make this one.
ape-based pattern recognition. We all have it. Like it's ingrained in us genetically to recognize patterns, and so we say if A, then B, then B, then
See,
C.
not
Yeah,
necessarily.
exactly.
It just go to
Not
B
always.
and stop.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly.
and
So that's why it's
go to
important to
B
have a
and
plan.
unstoppable. Like that's the other thing is people need to maintain hope that if you have a plan, if you organize, if you can change the trajectory of things. Like they don't have to just be inexorable, right?
Yeah,
But you have to do things if you want to change the path, right?
you do.
The things don't change on their own. One of my, kind of, I used to love the quote, the Martin Luther King Jr. quoted. He was not actually the first to say it, but then Obama would quote it all the time. The moral arc of the history bends towards justice, and that sounds beautiful. And then I
In
have come
time,
to really
certainly.
hate it because it implies that it's out there and done on its own, like it's a law of the universe. And I'm like, no, the moral arc of the universe whipsaws back and forth. Like
Right.
you must bend it. You must be engaged in that.
And you
Or
got to
else-
remember before it can bend, it's already got to be bent.
Right,
Before it can go
right.
back down. So yeah, you're gonna have to live through that.
Yeah.
if you, if you're just waiting for justice. Like maybe in 50 years, we'll look back and be like, and we recovered from that thing. But it's like, but you may die today.
And even
So
then, somebody got in the way of it. Like somebody
yeah.
had
Oh
to,
yeah, always.
get active. It doesn't bend on its own.
Exactly.
So yeah,
And Trump, God, with Trump's attitude, specifically, he says things like the golf analogy he made. If somebody gives you a gimme, you take it. If somebody gives you a jet, you take it. Grab them by the pee.
right.
Things like that. He is absolutely the type of man who takes advantage of anything he can get his hands on. So as long as Democrats, as long as people on the left, as long as anybody who's not MAGA, even people on the right, if you find what he's doing intolerable, then don't just sit back and wait. Like you have to push back because I know people like him. I've hung out with some really bad people in my life. I've hung out with some like really rough gangbang. I've hung out with murderers. I've hung out with people in the military who've killed people. I've hung out with people on the street who've killed people. I have seen a type of personality that you do not see in normal everyday life. People out there, perfect. I'll tell this one story. This guy I was hanging out with when I was 18. We were standing out on the patio smoking one day, and this car drove by in the parking lot. And it was nighttime, it was, apartment in Salem. Car drives by real slow, goes around the building, starts coming back around the building, and the guy's kind of looking at the buildings a little bit. And I'm like always looking for an address or something like that. Guy to my right says, "That's a cop." And I turn to him and I go, "What?" And he's already gone. And I look and he's running down the stairs, and I look out there and he dives through this person's window and starts just wailing on him. And all I could think to myself was his last words to me were, "That's a cop."
Right.
And I'm like,
police officer.
these people, these people don't care. They don't operate in the same world we do. And we have people who run our country at all levels, whether it's CEOs or, people like that. Those personality types exist everywhere throughout society, but generally they tend to get to the top because they're willing to be cutthroat. So Trump is one of those people.
Yes.
He's the kind of guy who would fly through the window and beat you up because he thought you were an enemy, Yep. So
that's I think your point about our system incentivizes cutthroat, right? It says this is the highest value. I've read a really interesting piece about sociopathy, or what we used to call psychopaths, right? And people who have that personality disorder are very hard to treat because they don't go for treatment. Like you have to be involved in your treatment. You have to want to get well, right?
Right.
And so if you don't have any conscience, you don't think that's a problem.
Why would I need to change?
And you would think that the highest percentage of those people would be found in prison, but it's not true. Psychopaths often aren't violent. They are, they do tend to be.
Some are nurses.
The highest percentage is Wall Street. They're stockbrokers because there's an advantage to being able to go, okay, I know that this decision that I'm going to make, these people are not stupid. They are aware. I know this decision that I'm going to make to short sell this particular company is going to absolutely demolish the pensions of a bunch of people in Indiana. And so a bunch of people who are retired and need this because they're living on a fixed income are suddenly going to be broke. But I don't care about them, right? And they can make decisions faster because they don't care. And so that whole system is, way disproportionately, it's a bunch of psychopaths in that room who do not care about other people. And we have said, then they're the best for that. Rather than, hey, maybe let's fill that room with empathetic people, right? No.
Right.
The room is about what makes the maximum profit for my personal clients at the expense of everybody else. And to it used to be you had to play the empathy role really well in politics, even if you were a psychopath. So these, the people who were, some of our most ambitious leaders were like, I am ambitious and I will present myself as caring. Right?
I've said that a lot, that we forgot to pretend. We're forgetting to pretend that we have ideals. We're forgetting to pretend that we have morals.
Got the ego to say, I can be the president of the United States, is going to have some narcissistic personality tendencies. Right? Because already they have the confidence to go, I deserve that role. Like if you put me in that role, I would just curl up in my bed and cry all the time. Because you're making decisions that kill people all the time. Like it is an incredibly, and so it lends itself to those folks, but they had to play the role of I care about you, right? And some of them were really good at it. Bill Clinton was famous for making people feel cared about. Dude was a psychopath too. They're all psychopaths,
well,
right?
for sure, yeah.
really good at that. And if we lose that, like that, obligation to at least pretend like you care, we enter into this very dangerous place where then they can be their full selves, where it's no, I throw ketchup at the wall, I, mistreat the staff at the White House, because that's the personality I inhabit. Like previous presidents would have been humiliated if people had been like, yeah, he threw a hamburger at the wall, And
For
now
sure.
once you cross that and it's okay, it's a very dangerous place.
I do feel, though, it's worth mentioning that these types of personalities are beneficial, and that is why they end up in the positions they do. It's not just because they're the most ruthless or cutthroat. There's also a societal benefit to it,
Right.
because we have to remember these people are not operating in a vacuum. They're operating in a world where other countries like China and Russia and these other people want to undermine us. So having the most ruthless American at the top is as beneficial to us to resist against the most ruthless Chinese
Right. I
dictator.
just think that, yeah, I totally agree. I think the thing is, the society needs to provide that
Yes.
balance where society says, hey, if you're going to pass laws, you at least have to convince us that you care, even if you don't, so
Right.
that you'll end up passing caring laws, right? And so it kind of forced narcissists to go, the best advantage for me is to pretend to care, right?
Yes.
And provides that check. And if you lose that and you go, the best thing is to demonstrate how little you care, the wheels have come off.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, I think a great example of that was Trump being asked, does he need to follow the Constitution? And him going, I don't know. It's like, right, because I bet you most presidents throughout history are like, but they would never have said that.
It
They
wouldn't
would have been
say,
like, absolutely. And they would have acted in it, and they would have made sure people understood that they were acting in that way. And it's that lost lie
yeah.
that is costing us the
Oh,
most.
the other day he was on that Fox morning show that he loves to go on, and the one of the hosts, the token white woman, like there's always the guys always stay the same, and the women keep changing, but the token white woman was asking this very thoughtful, good question where she goes, shouldn't we be dialing down the rhetoric to decrease violence on both sides, which I thought was a totally legitimate, reasonable question to ask the president of the United States. And I kid you not, he goes, I don't care about that. The extremists on the right care about crime. Like he was, and once upon a time, I'm sure every president would have said, I would much rather have the people on my side be a lot more extreme than the people on the, but they would have kept that inside. Like,
Right.
they
Because
wouldn't
we
have,
wouldn't have tolerated that on
right.
either
He's
side.
coming
But
out and
when that
saying,
becomes tolerable, then yeah,
right-wing
we're
violence is fine because it's opposed to crime. Left-wing violence is criminal. And I wish Americans understood the definition of criminal is just whatever the state says is the definition of criminal. If
yeah.
they want to say, having D next to your name on your voter registration is a crime, then you are a criminal. They can decide you are a criminal.
And we're seeing a perfect example of that with the immigration laws, where they suddenly changed the laws on what's an immigrant. And now they're saying, oh, we're deporting illegals. And then you got people on the right saying, well, they're just deporting illegals. And you going like, no, they're deporting regular Americans. And then everybody's confused on what the truth is when the truth is they're winning. That's
Yeah,
all that matters.
that's all that matters.
So,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah,
Well,
that's why this document was so important to me. I do want to offer workshops. I mentioned it earlier. So yeah, if people are
and so
willing to reach out to me.
we will certainly put this in the show notes as well. But is there a particular way for people to reach out to you? And is there a website or anything, or just email, or how should
Yeah,
folks?
I do have my photography website. Probably not a good way to reach out to me, but if you ever want to check that out, it's dsharman.photography is the
We didn't get
website.
to talk much about that because I did want to talk about your photography itself
I know.
on a podcast.
I was having a good conversation about this
Yeah.
though.
Well, and like your art doesn't lend itself to podcasts, right? You are often
Right.
very visual, but I do encourage people to check out your work. And yeah, if we had more time, I would love to talk about being a photographer, especially not doing political work and kind of its merit in the world of a fascist uprising. So maybe we'll have to have you back because I would like
For
to.
sure. Yeah, I'd love to come back.
But where could folks find out about reach out to you about what's the best way to reach out about workshop? Because I think that's
Probably my email. So if you reach out it's dana@dsharman.photography.
okay.
Yeah, no
Toss that in
.com or
the show
anything
notes.
like
If you're
that.
watching this on YouTube or you're listening on your podcast, that will be right there in the notes that you can see, and we'll write it in that way that hides it from like being scraped. So you'll
Okay.
have to recognize it's at the at is not the word at, it's the symbol. Like but yes, we'll put that up so that you don't get tons of spam or whatever.
All
But
right.
I think that would be really good for folks to reach out and, do one of those workshops. It will help you think through what to do next in a way that will, I just want to keep saying this, it will actually reduce your stress to prepare.
Yeah, and making connections with people who are of a similar mind to you never hurts. You
Yep.
know, I think it's good just to build community.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for being here, and we'll, put that stuff up. So please, folks, check that out. And thank you for joining us for the inaugural episode of Tilting at Windmills. We did it.
We did it. Thank you.
Take care.